Hello, guys, and welcome to the podcast, Fiddler's Green podcast number 44, the meta. Oops, I forgot to reset my slide deck. It's been quite a week. But thank you for joining me anyway, because we're still doing a live stream. We're still going to have a conversation tonight, even though I threw it together at the last minute. It's kind of funny. The preparation you put into these live streams has absolutely no impact on how much people will enjoy them. Last week, I did a extended podcast where I just complained about various political enemies and compared them to the four chaos gods from Warhammer 40k, and people loved it. It was one of the more popular ones of these podcasts. And I literally just wrote it on the back of an envelope and threw it together on my way home from work and then put together a bunch of slides. Today I'm going to do a different thing. I'm going to discuss a topic that I've been thinking about for a really long time, but it's a lot more boring and a lot less intellectual. It's a lot more intellectual. And I'm not going to have the opportunity to just scream at the camera about how retarded I think Ben Shapiro is, or how fake and gay I think the rest of the internet is, and it's going to be much less entertaining. But you're here, so we might as well get on to it. This week, we actually, the local Basque Weavers chapter that I was involved with, I think we had a pretty major success in the fact that we were able to put together a little mini conference, a little mini banquet, where I and a bunch of other people, Luther Templar, Not Me, Not You, gave speeches, about 20 minutes. And if you're wondering why one of my podcasts was missing from last week, my mode for interacting with this, my mode for coming up with a presentation really, really quickly, was just to rant into the microphone with notes and then try to cut something down to 20 minutes. And it actually worked out pretty well. It's kind of funny when you think about how these things work, because, and this is going to be part of the topic that we discussed today, just going through the eras of YouTube, the prominence put on live streams is just kind of crazy at this stage. It's, you work on an essay, you'll polish something up, but it will never be as impactful as something that you say in the live stream or get as many views. And all of YouTube's game is now just about getting views from the live streams. And it's kind of funny. It's tempting in all of these things. It's tempting in all of these conversations and podcasts just to come in and give a 2-hour rant about people who are pissing you off on Twitter. And the more you can dress it up as something that's ideological or something that's considered, the better your podcast will be. I mean, there weren't any lack of people who were pissing me off on Twitter this week. This is kind of a warm-up. This is a prelude to the actual topic I want to mention or talk about. I don't know how much it's really worth going into it. But I mean, there's always these constant, people just never change online. People never change. And so you go to this, perhaps I should start with the actual success. You go to these, we set up a little mini conference, a banquet. It's a wonderful get together. It actually demonstrates a lot of learning and a lot of success that we've had with doing this kind of thing over the last year and a half since our first conference in early 2022. And it also shows a certain amount of proof of concept for a lot of our projects. People have been starting a number of collective fraternal, should I say fraternal? I should say organizational projects like basket weaving, like the Beowulf Foundation, like the Old Glory Club. And these are all designed to get people from the internet into a place where they're interacting in real life. And sure enough, if people have been watching this channel long enough, they'll know that I tried to create something like this myself in 2019, and basically based off my Discord server called the Canis Society. And it was not just my effort, it was a few other people's. And I designed this, we came up with this Canis Society as a first step to try to get into the real world, to try to make internet connections into something thicker that actually could withstand the force of pressure from the outside, because everyone was getting banned. This is 2019, 2020. This is when the ban hammers were really, really ramping up. So we create this Canis Society, and then 7 days later, our Discord server gets banned. And we lose all of our central organization. We have to reestablish it. Then my wife gets pregnant and I have to get another job. So I'm going from being full court press on organizing to being someone who has to more or less sit in the background and observe things. And then 8 months after that, you get COVID. And everyone knows the story on that. And good luck having an organization that's designed to get people into real life when everyone's being locked down. And if you're locked down with a 1-year-old or a newborn, that there's sort of an additional element to that where you feel like you just don't want to interact with the real world. And you kind of realize in all of this that ideas, they have to have a certain amount of maturity. They have to match up to the time that they're in. It was too early to start a fraternal organization or an in real life meetup group in 2019. That wasn't really where things were. People's headspace were still in the mode of the Gamergate years, and it needed to move beyond that. And it really wasn't until after COVID, until people started realizing what had happened in 2020, that we had essentially experienced a soft coup, that we had essentially experienced a soft cultural revolution, and that if they want to live inside of that, they would have to make separate arrangements. It wasn't until that point where people were really willing to stand up, and you saw, it really was sort of a quality control issue, to be quite honest. It was an issue of the fact that most of the people who were there in 2018 and 2019, and I knew some great people in the crowd. I mean, back in the Kansas ideas, I had some really good friends in the Discord server. They were really great guys. But the Discord server and the community of online people who are watching my videos, which is roughly equivalent to what it is today. I think the views have remained more or less static on YouTube. They've actually gone up a little bit, to be quite honest. But back in the day, I mean, most of the viewers and most people who read my essays are very, very serious about things. But in 2017, 2018, everyone was just there for laughs. They were there to kind of like come along for the ride and push over the false idol of progressivism. And things hadn't really gotten serious yet. And there was still this idea that, the establishment was essentially a paper tiger, and at some point the amount of noise you made would correlate with an actual institutional change at some level where you could measure it. This is back in the day. Everyone when Sargon was running for political office in the UK. This was when Mr. Medicare was still a big deal. It wasn't really, it was definitely post the Gamergate era in the sense that this was way past the whole alt-right thing in 2017. And this was edging into the election year of 2020, but people were still in a completely different mindset. They had no idea exactly the seriousness that was needed. Yet you try the exact same things and you have more serious people try very similar things in 2022, and all of a sudden the machinery just starts clicking into place. The season is right. The mood is in the right way. People are actually willing to take responsibility and form permanent connections. And so, obviously I've talked a lot about the conferences and the various speeches there, and those are their own thing. And I've been to about 3 of them at this stage, or spoken at 3 of them, I should say. And what's nice about the conferences, what's notable about them is they're very, very intense. I think there's some kind of machine going off in the background, so I apologize if you can hear a high-pitched squeaking. It sounds like a bus stopping. But the the conferences are great. They're really intense. They're amazing places for picking up new ideas. In last conference I went to in Viton, I was able to meet Johan Kurtz and the Walrus and a Pharaoh and a variety of other people. Obviously, Morgarth and Sargon. This is machine noise is very irritating, but just ignore that. A variety of people like Sargon and Morgoth, obviously, even though I didn't get to hear them speak. And it's a great place for exchanging ideas and kind of contemplating where the movement is. But it's super intense. It's a very, very, I don't want to say high pressure because you're just there having a good time, but it's an entire weekend. It never lets up. The price tag is somewhat significant. And even though you're getting these great interactions and you're building these connections and you're helping the movement take the next step forward, it's also not some place that you could just kind of wander into randomly and and feel your way around and kind of feel at home there. And as such, and this is something that we've talked about in basket weaving a lot, is what are the next steps. So when we put on this mini event, this banquet in New Jersey, it was kind of proof of concept of an entirely different thing. This time, people were encouraged to bring family and plus ones. I unfortunately was forced to bring my son because we lost our babysitting at the last minute. And but the thing is because it was held at essentially a public house, or what we used to call inns, and the environment was so casual and so welcoming that most people were there with friends and family that had no idea what basket weaving was, what all this distant right stuff was. They were just there to be a friend, to have dinner, to talk to people, to meet people. Everyone was in nice dress. Everyone was very gregarious, had good drinks, and talking about music and films and all this stuff. And then the entire mood just communicated that you could really have anybody come to this event. You could have a coworker come to this event. You could have your mother come to this event. You could have your grandfather come to this event. And what would be communicated would be a lot of very well-to-do people, a lot of family men, a lot of professionals are all sitting around having dinner, having good drinks, sharing beer and libations and wine and a roast, and then discussing how to fix society. What can we do positively to take a step forward? And telling good stories, and then connecting up afterwards to talk about next steps. This was sort of an entire world that I remember very distinctly my parents participating in and being part of. But that seems to be almost absent from my own life, how I live it now, and absent from most people my age's life. I've been talking to a variety of people from my work, and I talk to family members too who are my age, and they tell me their understandings. They talk to coworkers, and so many people who are roughly my age, probably in their late 20s, early 30s, even though I'm in my late 30s. What they say is, well, I'm not really into organizations. I'm not really into friends. I'm not really into activities. I'm just into doing my own thing. I'm just into kind of doing my own thing. I'm good by myself, which means largely that they're just locked in their own little virtual cocoons. They're into watching live stream. Now, you're watching a live stream right now, right? So, we're all guilty in participating in this stuff. Guilty is charged. But you can tell from how they're responding that their life is entirely contained in video games and in movies and in fandoms. And because of that, there's this whole level of richness and this whole mode of communicating about actual problems that you can't really reach them with. You can't start a conversation about how, what schools are good to put your kids into, or what your fears are about homeschooling, or what's stopping you from homeschooling. And my kid goes to a private school. We're not homeschooling. It's expensive, but I have a day job. And my wife is in school, so we obviously can't manage anything like that right now. But at the same time, there's a conversation too, right? Exactly how is your parish? How much do you like the teachers? How sympathetic are they? How much would they? How aware are they of the problems that we're talking about at this banquet right now? You've seen a variety of really good-looking guys talk about these problems we have that are going to confront our children, that are going to be issues for us in the future. Now, how much can you take that to your own personal life, to your own professional life, to your own parent-teacher conferences? And if not, why not? And how many people there might be sympathetic to what we're saying? These are the kind of places, the kind of spaces that if you built them and built them regularly, and this is something that I think we're probably going to look to host like 3 times a year, so it's very far away from being a regular thing. But still, it's a beginning, and if you can create these spaces, and you can have, a 20-year-old, a 20-something guy with a lot of new ideas and a lot of energy, if he walks into one of these organizations and gives the right speech and has the right boomer with a little bit of extra money in his pocket listen to him, that's how magic happens. That's how new ideas get started. That's how new plans get put together. I kind of regret it because to a certain degree, I wanted to stay till, 12 midnight, right? And just talk to these guys and make connections and pass my contact information around and see what they were doing and try to get more information. Of course, like, unfortunately, I'm not 24, right? I'm literally there with a little kid. I literally had to teach Sunday school the next day. I had to put together a lesson plan for kids in my parish. Like, I can't just sit outside, drinking my third drink of the night, talking about what your plans are for your actions in a local area. But I like the fact that that space was created for people who wanted it and people who needed it, and that's the way we go forward. And subsequently, because everyone is there in person, you get much more mature conversations. You get much more productive. Things move around in loops, and you see this. You come back from this circumstance, right? You come back from this experience. It's not entirely unique, but it's kind of a refreshing window into a better world. And then you get on Twitter or X, and you look at the discourse, and it's the same stupid shit. It's the same moving in circles over and over and over again, and you just want it to move forward. And the my wife's trolling me in the chat. You just want to move forward. Like, just today, we have this whole idiotic thing, and okay, we talk about issues, getting people. This is a constant thing. You talk about issues constantly, getting people matched up. This is something that we talk about all the time in our organizations, is how do we get young men married to young women, and moreover, suitable young men. And what happens? What happens is you get all of these weird anons show up and say, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, do you have any actual answers to us that don't involve manning up? All I ever hear is man up, bucko, man up, bucko. What are you doing to fix the problem? And okay, Mr. Anon, Anime Avatar 1788, this is... What do you want me to tell you about the situation? The situation is, the reality is that it is incredibly hard relative to at least the last 5 generations to meet young eligible women as a young man. There's less eligible women than there used to be, and they are pickier than they used to be. So you have to be very, very tactical about how you go about doing this. And so what do you want me to say? If we were setting up something like a matchmaking service, and a lot of people have done that, there's even an entire organization in the dissident sphere called Keeper.ai that literally focuses on getting people matched up and changing and sort of flipping the tables on the typical pattern of matchmaking. There's all sorts of religious organizations that attempt to do this as well. And there's also individual women who are trying their hand at matchmaking. But the problem with all of this, the problem with Conservamatch too, is that there's a huge quality control problem, because every single guy, every single internet weirdo is coming on and looking for like the perfect trad waifu, and there's no understanding of what women want, there's no understanding what the community wants, and there's no understanding of the actual constraints. And subsequently, there's going to have to be some kind of ask for people to actually make a community, show themselves be part of it, provide some kind of leveling up or quality control or filter. And yeah, I mean, if that's your perception of man up, then, man up's an essential part of this process. There's no other way around it. And of course, that's not what people want to hear. People, oh, well, you don't really care. You don't really care about men online. You don't really care about us. It's all this pity party stuff. And keeps on going. Or they'll come back like, what's your manifesto? What's your manifesto for, manifestos. People write manifestos. People write endless pieces of theory about what they want to have. The problem is manifestos are almost entirely cringe. Manifestos are almost entirely cringe because in order for a piece of art or a piece of writing of any variety to have any kind of meaning or purpose, it has to be directed to a certain person, a certain group of people. And the problem with manifestos is they're almost always overly specific. there's sort of there's sort of a political agenda before you have political power, which is always, I mean, you can talk about political principles. You can talk about the way to wisely govern a people. You can tell people about how you think politics works and what you want a good government to prioritize in terms of values, and what the best way is to get a government into power that would prioritize those values. But that's not the same thing as a manifesto. A manifesto is like this is what we are going to deliver to you. How is this possible? I mean, most people are talking about some kind of imminent decline or collapse occurring in the next 20 years before there is a regime change. How would you possibly know whether your manifesto is remotely implementable? And this is always the pediment. Manifestos are almost universally a joke. Charles Haywood, who's a thinker that I deeply respect, who's a very clever man and a good writer and has an excellent Substack. I don't know if he wrote a manifesto, if it was called a manifesto, but he wrote this piece on foundationalism, which is his ideology. And he lays it out like a manifesto would be laid out. And again, like it's not like there's not any good ideas in the whole foundationalist piece. It's a fine document insofar as what it is. But the problem is it's phrased in a way that is kind of stupid. It's phrased in a way that's designed to kind of fail, because no plan for the future that specific could ever be put into practice. For instance, Charles Haywood talks a lot about space exploration. He talks, I mean, like all the space exploration we're going to be doing when the new regime comes into power and wipes away the old global American empire and replaces it with something that's new and vitalistic. We're going to do space exploration. And he goes into great detail about this. How does he know that that's even a priority? I mean, Earth could be in the process of dealing with some great catastrophe at that stage. And so all he does is give his opponents this opportunity to kind of dunk on him for writing something that sounds like a Robert A. Heinlein novel from 1971. And not that I have anything wrong with Heinlein. I mean, he's a great sci-fi author, but it sounds kooky. And that's because manifestos are not really directed at anybody. They're not really directed at, I mean, they're directed at some hypothetical user. I mean, autistic people love manifestos. Autistic people love manifestos because they perceive them as promises. Like, oh, this is what we're going to give you. We're going to give you X. We're going to give you Y. We're going to give you a house. We're going to give you a girlfriend. We're going to make anime real. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to have space marines. I'm going to be a god emperor on a golden throne. And that's what, like, autists love this shit, right? I mean, who cares if it's not achievable? Who cares if reality is too dynamic? Because reality is too dynamic. I've promised you all this stuff in a nice document, and you can hold it up and wave it around and go, "This is what my philosophy is. This manifesto." Yeah, but that's a formula. That's a formula for being cringe. It's a formula for being cringe because you're giving somebody something that looks like a promise that couldn't possibly be achieved. I can tell you that I want a Christian ruler and a Christian sovereign to govern humanity, and I want somebody to govern humanity who has humanity's interests at heart and is willing to put those first and is willing to actually do what's necessary to put those things first. And I can outline a bunch of principles that a sovereign should take into consideration. And he should prioritize the human family. He should not kill unnecessarily. He should be willing to use force, but very hesitant to do so. And we can create a manual for princes of this variety, a manual for Christian princes. And we can publish it, and that's all very well and good as a piece of political philosophy. But once I get super specific and talk about future-based Caesar's space program and his plan to get to Mars in 20 years, in the way that most of these manifestos do, I could be as intelligent as Charles Haywood, and it's still, because of what that thing is, it's not a good thing. It's not an effective thing to do. And this is I'm digressing a lot, and that's the whole point of these things, and that's what you're tuned in for. It's funny because you can see a lot of these kind of online conversations evolve. I will say that no progress is made in dialectic, and I did kind of want to touch on this before I started the more pertinent topics. But there have been some evolutions on the online front. There was recently a debate between, what was it? It was Jay Dyer. I'm gonna look this up, guys. Give me a second. Jay Dyer and uh, let's see. I'm kind of. Give me a second, guys. This is bad form to not have this immediately up, but I need to get this guy's name. And it's gonna be the first entry since it was the most recent Jay Dyer debate. It was Jay Dyer and it's only gonna be 20 minutes, and Matt Dillahunty, right? What? Yeah, I think it is Matt Dillahunty. Yeah, it's Matt Dillahunty and Jay Dyer, and this was something that I hope that was the wrong one. This is only a 20-minute debate, so it better be a very, very short video, if that's the one. And so Matt Dillahunty is an atheist from. I need to make sure that this is the right guy. Matt Dillahunty, he's the atheist guy, right? He's the atheist guy. Anyway, I think it's Matt Dillahunty, and I'll spare the details in case I got this absolutely wrong. And so as anyone who knows this, a classic thing from early internet era, a classic thing from 2008, and I talk about this all the time, was the atheist versus Christian debates. This is one of the biggest failures on understanding how meta politics and meta dialectics work. Whatever, people will be studying this period for ages to come, the atheist and Christian debates, not for their content, but for their lack of content. And it's a debate I talk about all the time because it's something that I participated in both sides. And as I always say, that the point of a debate is not to come to a conclusion over whose arguments are right, but to sort of evaluate where everyone is emotionally and psychologically. And what the debates did is, the sort of rhetorical trick is, you can go, people have been debating the existence of God for ages and ages and ages, and you can actually go back to the early 20th century if you want to listen to a very, very good God debate between one of the greatest atheist intellectuals of all time, Bertrand Russell, and some Jesuit priest who was an intellectual at the time. I can't remember the priest's name. But that shows you how an actual early 20th century, 19th century debate went. And I think it took about half an hour to 40 minutes. And the debate was largely the Jesuit priest laying out his argument for the cosmological argument for God. And then it involved Bertrand Russell essentially trying to question the assumptions and poke holes in the axioms of the cosmological argument. And then eventually they narrow in on one axiom, and the Jesuit priest says, I think that this axiom is necessary for all human existence to have any meaning or coherency. And then Bertrand Russell says, I don't think that is a necessary axiom. I would not accept that axiom. And then the priest is like, okay, we're at an impasse. We disagree on an axiom. That's the end of the debate. And that was the end of the debate. That's, they laid bare the intellectual difference. They had zero emotion. It was interesting as a historical artifact, but if I'm being quite honest, it was thoroughly boring. It was, I think the Jesuit was American, but it seemed to have kind of a British style to it. And so this was, but this showed you how these were what college debates looked like back in the time. Two guys going through an argument, very friendly, very cordial. They narrow the axiom that's the difficulty, and then one person accepts it and one person rejects it. It's like the axiom of choice. It's like the piano axioms. If you're a Bertrand Russell fan, you know what that is. Or even a math guy, right? Bertrand Russell was very formative in the development of these foundational axioms of integer mathematics and stuff like that in the early 20th century. He was a famous mathematician in his own regard. And so that's the atheist debate in its sort of pure intellectual form. Okay, you fast forward to 2008, 2009. What do you have here? Well, what do you have in 2000, right after 2012, 2013, right? You have this sort of pay-per-view slug at like these celebrity atheists debating Christians. And I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. The Christians come in looking for that the sort of the repetition of what the Bertrand Russell versus Jesuit priest debate was in 1920 something or whatever. They're looking for a repetition of that debate. And the atheists, most prominently among them Christopher Hitchens, who is really into this, and Dawkins too, all they want to do is kind of bash Christianity with rhetorical flourishes, sit there with crossed arms, and then demand that the theist prove all of their points to some high degree of confidence. And as soon as you come up with a cosmological argument, well, the cosmological argument isn't sufficient. Or if you come up with the ontological argument, well, that's not enough, right? Well, not only do you have to have that, now you also have to prove that miracles exist. Now you have miracles proved to have, now that you've proved that miracles can exist, now you have to prove that specific miracles did occur. And you can go into the Richard Carrier arguments about prove to be that the resurrection happened to like a high degree of Bayesian certainty, or I'm an atheist. Checkmate, Christians. And like, okay, prove anything to a high degree of Bayesian certainty that happened 2,000 years ago is absolutely nuts. And this is how the whole thing worked. It was like a shtick. It was a game. It was sort of a game of hide the bacon, so to speak. The point was to shift, and again, this is a core thing on my channel. The point was to shift the burden of proof onto the theist, and then dance around rhetorically while the theist tried to spew out more and more and more arguments, making fun of the fact that he was tying himself in knots doing so, because the more you have to explain, the more defensive you look. And so this creates an entertaining product for atheists of the time. And so fine, you realize that these debates are dishonest at a certain point, and I've told you many stories about how I slowly realized that the atheists' part in these debates was fundamentally dishonest. Misattributions, not caring about the truth, picking on straw men, and this eventually got me looking in other ways. But when I came back as a Christian and saw this game done again, I honestly asked myself, and this is a lot of what took me down the neo-reactionary path, I asked myself, what the hell are these Christian apologists doing, still participating in this farce? This is obviously a bad faith argument. This is obviously shifting the goalposts. And they should just cross their arms and say, like, okay, they should just attack their moral system and demand that they prove the existence of human rights, demand that they prove the existence of human dignity, demand that they prove the need for rationality, the need for belief in truth, or the goodness of pleasure over pain, or any one of these core axioms. Similar core axioms are attacked in God debates when it come up in the process of debating Christianity. So why can't you attack their core axioms? But of course, the frame is never there. The frame of the debate's always with the negative side being the atheist. And it turned out like it's funny because the Jay Dyer versus Matt Dillahunty debate. I still want to recheck here. Is this the guy? In the edited version, this will be cut out of the program. Yeah, I guess so. Matt Dillahunty versus Andrew Wilson. Isn't that Jay Dyer? Okay, it says Andrew Wilson. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but it's Andrew Wilson versus Matt Dillahunty. I think I got this wrong. It's actually not Jay Dyer. It's Andrew Wilson. And so, but regardless of whether it's Jay Dyer, his voice sounded a lot like Jay Dyer, which is why I had this confused. But at any rate, this guy Andrew apparently has figured out the game of new atheism. And so Matt Dillahunty comes up making his typical, you have to prove it to me. You can't prove God. You can't prove miracles, specific miracles ever happened to like a 95, you can't prove it with an alpha of 95, or with a type 1 error tolerance of 5%, with double tested experiments that Jesus actually rose from the grave 2,000 years ago. So checkmate, Christians. And as an added bonus, aren't Republicans stupid and backwards and horrible? Aren't I right? Huck, 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 huck. And that's his debate. He's like, well, I'm sure Andrew isn't as bad as all of these horrible Republicans. And, you know, I could tell from his disposition that Andrew Wilson was probably way more conservative than half of these Republicans that Matt Dillahunty is having an aneurysm over in Congress because they decided to split off the Ukrainian funding from the Israeli funding in the latest round of Biden's war games he's playing. And so Andrew Wilson just gets up there and says, okay, I'm a Christian. For the purpose of this argument, I'm just going to concede that there is no God. It's all made up. And I am here proposing a new version of secular humanism that asserts all the ethical propositions of Christianity, in addition to the fact that homosexuality is harmful to human thriving, that transsexuality is harmful to human thriving, and that men cannot be women and cannot get pregnant. And I want to challenge Matt Dillahunty to get up here and use all of his great reasoning, all of his great secular reasoning logic to prove to me that men can be women and can have babies as trans women or as trans men. That men can have babies. And I want him to prove to me, to my satisfaction and to a scientific level of certainty, that is true and that his values are better than mine. And I yield the rest of my time. That's the entire thing. And sits down. And what does Matt Dillahunty do? He storms off. I don't have to sit for you. You called trans women men. I don't have to stand for this. And the guy's like, well, aren't you going to prove it to me? Aren't you going to prove your presupposition that trans women are women? I thought you were all about discourse. I thought you were all about reasoning. He storms right out. It's because the presupposition is you can assert anything as secular humanism once you take God off the table. Once the arguments for Christian ethics are put strictly in the framing that the secular humanist has claimed for himself, namely objectivity, rationality, of representing real human thriving, of representing the conclusion of all reasonable people, then all of a sudden it's no longer clear who has the presumption, who has the burden of proof. And you're stuck like Matt Dillahunty having to prove your ethical presuppositions about human rights and about liberalism and about how human thriving is communicated through sexual choices. And not only that, you're also forced to prove manifestly absurd things that are asserted as part of progressive pieties that Matt Dillahunty has asserted in many other instances. In fact, I think that Matt Dillahunty had a trans family member who he's prominently been connected to, which is probably why he was so offended. But offended or not, that's the end of the debate. That's the end. And I mean, it took the internet 15 years to see this, 15 years to understand how this game works, 15 years to understand how a frame game works properly. And now we finally arrived at it. Once the value propositions of the atheists are shifted such that they have to prove to you what they hold as essential, they tap out. They have no arguments. All they can do is sort of call you bad names and move to the back and demand their money back, like petulant, spoiled children. And no learning is had, and no growth is experienced. I do think that dialectic progress is possible on the internet, and that's sort of what I want to talk about in this talk. Is what is the progress we're expecting to see on the internet, and how does this interact with the rest of our lives? And this kind of brings me to, maybe I'll switch to the presentation mode now. This kind of brings me to, probably should put my face in here. This brings me to the biggest topic that everyone's been talking about these last few weeks, which is the subject of Boogie 2988. So I don't know what to say about this. So there's a documentary released on this guy. This guy is, I'll tell you the story of this guy, Boogie 2988. And, you could watch the documentary too. But I felt that the documentary kind of skirted around what the real issues were. But I'll give you a summary on this. All right, so Boogie 2988 was one of the original YouTubers. So YouTube started roughly around, I don't know, I'm sure it was there before this, but everyone remembers it coming around between 2006 and 2007. That's when really the YouTube explosion started. And then I think in 2007 it was purchased by Google and sort of really took off, and people could upload anything they wanted to. But it's kind of weird when you think about it, but very few people just when YouTube came around, just decided, and when, for instance, when Facebook came out about a year before that, pretty much everyone instantly created an account and started broadcasting their opinions and their lives about Facebook from where they were. And that was something that everyone just kind of immediately took to, or Gmail, or email, or even earlier than that, or instant messaging. Everyone started immediately using it, and not only reading it, but also uploading on it themselves. But YouTube was different. For the most part back in the day, YouTube was seen strictly as a place where you went to find funny videos. You were a pure consumer of YouTube the way that you are a pure consumer of television. And really just turning on the camera to your own bedroom, your own kind of squalid life, and just talking to people about it for, an hour or 20 minutes or 10 minutes. I think the old YouTube videos were 10 minutes back in the day. The whole idea that you just do that was kind of nuts. And, there are a few people who did it. Obviously, TJ the Amazing Atheist, Boogie2988. Those are the people. There's Lacey Green. Wasn't she one of the original ones that she's doing? Like, her idea was to do sort of a sex advice column back in the day. I think it was a sex advice column or something like that. But it was this whole idea that you'd broadcast yourself spontaneously on this platform that was really for having funny clips and pranks was very, very novel back in the day. It was not something that really, and politics was not a big part of YouTube. There's this guy called Lee Doran, who's the first. I remember he was like the first conservative. I don't know. I think he got absorbed into some think tank because he was a lawyer of some type. He's one of these neocons who always did responses. I think his YouTube channel was called How the World Worked, but he did responses to leftists on YouTube in the form of conversations. Very prominently, the Amazing Atheist, who's a progressive. And so Boogie298 was one of the original crowd of YouTubers, and he was this guy who would, he basically, originally I think he just talked about nerd and hobby stuff. And then afterwards, he started developing all of these little shorts about this horribly obese autistic guy called Francis, which, and this is always sort of the problem with these things, Francis was a character that was supposed to make fun of fat, neckbeard, like morbidly obese neckberg autistsbergs who have no control over themselves and who organize their entire life around consumer products and who spurg out the second things don't go their way like a little toddler, and who are completely in a mode of learned helplessness. I think you're probably for saying this is that It was very hard. I mean, Boogie2988 made a big deal about how I'm Boogie2988. I am like the nerd who likes all of the nerdy stuff across the board. Being a nerd is my identity. You can see it in this picture. I mean, name the number of sort of franchises in this whole thing. It's like the Nerd Crew parody from Red Letter Media. You've got Star Wars. You've got Conan the Barbarian. You've got a whole line of those stupid plastic dolls that everyone collects from the 2000s. You've got Pokemon. You've got Legend of Zelda. I don't know. You could just kind of go down and list them. I mean, does he have time to actually enjoy all this stuff? Who cares? It's his identity as a nerd. And so what was so strange about Boogie2988 was that the first content was sort of these parodies of these lifeless nerds who had a certain degree of learned helplessness. The second part of his channel content, though, was him being kind of uplifting and positive. Like, oh, I'm a beast, I'm a nerd, but like, I've got hope. I've got the stars in my eyes. I know that everything's going to work out for us. A positive message about doing the best for your life. And it was kind of funny because iHypocrite was watching this documentary on Boogie2988, which focuses on his downfall. And it's kind of hard to explain what made him popular to begin with. I think, and iHypocrite speculates that this was part of what was called Upworthy culture. So this was sort of, I can't remember exactly what Upworthy was. It was some kind of aggregator like Reddit, but before Reddit. And what people at this Upworthy aggregator really loved were these touching stories of personal development and personal triumph over adversity. And Boogie298, at least in his initial presentation, presented himself as somebody who would overcome all these elements of adversity. A history of an abusive family, a history of being obese, obviously, and eating horribly, and being, of course, this is back in the 2000s, so nerds still kind of pretended like they were the underdogs, and somehow being a nerd conferred on you special status, a status as somebody who was really had promise and imagination. It wasn't just sort of a consumer whore of comic book genre products and Magic the Gathering and all this horrible video game stuff. And okay, and Boogie 298 was going to be him triumphing over that. He came from these humble origins where he was a loser in his mom's basement, the same kind of character that he made fun of in his character Francis. And when we watch Boogie 298, we are watching him kind of like take a step forward. And so, early in his career, like he gets a really hot wife, he decides to start losing weight, or he's going to start losing weight. That's the idea, right? And what happens eventually is, and this is what the documentary details, and the guy gets up to 4 million subscribers. I'll say that. He gets up to 4 million subscribers. He's one of the largest YouTube channels of this genre on the entire platform via subscribers. But there's no point to it all. He gets to 2018 being one of the biggest YouTubers of all time. And then what happens? Well, he gives up on the weight loss plan and gets gastro bypass surgery. His wife leaves him under mysterious circumstances. It looks like it's going great. The next minute she's not there, even though he has a lot of money coming in from YouTube. And then slowly, as we move from 2018 to 2019, as shit starts getting real, so to speak, as the glimmer and glamour of nerd culture definitely wears off, and everyone kind of is locked into the same sad existences behind a YouTube screen, and it's no longer novel that you're willing to share yourself in front of a video camera because everyone is every day in their Zoom meetings. Suddenly, the whole shtick of Boogie 2988 completely falls through, and his income drops to almost nothing. And this documentary, and it's really fascinating when you think about it, because almost everyone has ever a YouTuber I have known has watched this documentary and has been really kind of affected by it in strange ways. And I'm kind of getting into why I think that is. And the reason, it's funny because you kind of realize how all of his existence is kind of a lie. I don't want to be harsh on the guy, but the documentary kind of explains the process of Boogie 2988 as it's telling his story about being broke after while having a channel that has 4 million subscribers and having made what must have been at least $1 million on YouTube over the subsequent decade being on the platform. And what it turns out, I mean, what you kind of see is you kind of see through the lie. I mean, obviously at this point, he has no people who actually view him. He has a hard time breaking 10,000 subscribers on any of his uploads. That's half the amount that I do, even though he has 100 times the amount of subscribers that I do, which is kind of ridiculous. And the story kind of goes is that he's just being dishonest about everything that's going on. And the inspiration that he expects you to take when looking at his life is like, oh, he's so poor. He's so put upon. He has so many things going wrong for him. He can't make a budget. He doesn't have enough money to pay mortgage. But then you realize that he's spent $200,000 on prostitutes. He buys every single video game that comes out. He's bought a Tesla. He has no ability to manage money. He has no desire to get a side job to make things work while his channel is going through a hard point. And all throughout it, the only thing you're led to believe is, oh, woe is me, woe is me. I just can't handle life. I just can't handle what's going on. It's sort of this wounded child kind of thing. Like, I want to retreat into this idea that I can't manage my own life as a 50-year-old man in the modern world, and I can't control my eating habits. He has horrible eating habits, obviously, right? Even after the bypass surgery, he has horrible health problems even after the surgery that are almost all due to weight, and yet we're kind of supposed to believe that, he's completely incapable of dealing with this situation. And Okay, but why is this interesting? This is like your standard episode of My 600-Pound Life. Well, I mean, what's interesting about it, and I know as a fact that this is why people are kind of looking at this, is that everyone's kind of wondering. Everyone kind of I'm stealing this from My Hypocrite. Boogie 2988 is just everything that's wrong with the millennial generation rolled up into one person. One very large person. No pun intended. But it's everything rolled up into one person. Everything wrong with the millennial generation. It's funny how many aspects of that he embodies. And whenever we watch Boogie 2988, we kind of see our own generation going in this direction. And our generation is going in the direction of Boogie 2988, even though I think he might be a Gen Xer. He is a millennial before millennials existed. And everyone is kind of aware that, we definitely will say, but for the grace of God, therefore go I. We could definitely say that. But more often than that, to the extent that we do not follow Boogie 2988, we are making distinct decisions in our life not to do what he does. And to the extent that we are doing what he does, maybe we are still following in Boogie 2988's path. And that's what gives it kind of this really, really spooky dimension to it. Especially, me here, obviously, how much am I like Boogie 2988? I'm a little overweight, right? I've got my PhD belly. It's gone down a little bit. I've gotten more exercise in. I've improved my back over the last year, which has really, really helped in my diet. So there's that, right? And obviously I have a job and a family and a kid and a wife that's, not just here for internet clout. So, a lot of things that are going on there, that kind of separate me from Boogie in that regard. But still, I'm a YouTuber. I'm a talking head speaking to you via the power of the internet, as Boogie 2988 says. I'm making fun of him for liking these nerd hobbies, right? And I'm making fun of him for Star Wars figures, but like, if I look a little bit to my side, like I can see like a Warhammer, painting stand there. I'm like, how far am I really away from that? How far away am I from regressing into this man-child? And it's all of the same qualities, you see. It's the inattention to health, and then trying to kind of phrase. It's the inattention to health, and then the combination. What I think a boomer would do, or a Gen Xer in this similar situation, is that they'd either take responsibility for it, or they would blame another person. They were like, oh, it's my fault. I'm a bad person. I'm guilty. Or they'd be like, no, this is all the fault of Dow Chemicals for putting high fructose corn syrup and seed oil in our food. And I'm actually very sympathetic to the whole seed oil theory, but I'm just saying that they would completely externalize it. What does Boogie do about his own weight? Well, what he does is he does this weird, very, very hyper-millennial thing where he makes himself a joke. Like, he creates a meta version of himself called Francis, who parades around and is a man-child and who's morbidly obese and who can't control his eating habits. And so he laughs at Francis with us. Like, he's part of the joke, but he's not part of the joke. Like, Francis is him. Like, his destroyed body is Francis's destroyed body. His man-child behavior is Francis's man-child behavior. Everything wrong with Francis is wrong with Boogie 2988. And so, okay, great. Like, you made a video where this guy is an alter ego and you're laughing at a parody exaggeration of yourself. But his problems are your problems. I mean, like, when you die in the internet, when you die in this game, you die in real life, Boogie. You're aware of that, right? When Francis has a heart attack, you will have a heart attack too. So that's one way that's the one uniquely millennial way that Boogie 2988 copes with his situation. The second way he copes with his situation, well, I should say there's three ways, right? The other way he copes with the situation is doing this whole equality, like, I deserve this shit, right? Like, I never got to sleep with women who are perfect 10s. I never got to sleep with women who are perfect. I guess this is a little bit more something that you could see boomers or Gen Xers do, so it's not uniquely a millennial. It's like, I deserve this, therefore I'm going to give it to myself. Like, I deserve to sleep with women who are perfect 10s. Therefore, I should be able to use $200,000 of my internet earning and spend it on prostitutes. And I'm not going to worry about what that does to them or what it does to me or how I could have used that to pay off my entire mortgage. But I deserve this. I deserve this. So I need this. This is cosmic justice demands that I have this for myself. That's the other thing he does. And then to kind of make matters worse, and this is what really creeps me out among a number of things. And this is what the documentary kind of highlights. And this is what I think what made the documentary so interesting. Actually, for due diligence, I need to look up the documentary and see who did it so I give proper credit. The documentary is called The Dark Sad Life of Boogie 2988. And it's by Mike Klum, the YouTube channel. And it's very good. But what makes the documentary so interesting is that all the while he's going through these problems where he has to admit that the surgery he's gotten has been useless because his lifestyle is so bad. He's blown all of his YouTube money. He can't find a way to create interesting content, and he can't budget and take care of his own life, even though he has resources available to him. All the while through this process, you get this sort of confessional, this level of self-awareness where, and this is a very uniquely millennial thing, where Boogie projects himself outside of his body and then confesses his sins to the camera, sort of in a way like I'm doing right now. And in this process, you're invited to believe that this moment is a genuine attempt for him to turn over a page. Like, I realize that I've inflicted this on myself. I've realized that I have a consumer habit. I realize that my life is. There's this glimmer of self-awareness in this moment where he's going to turn it all around, and that's what you're witnessing in this moment. And so you should feel sorry for him and give him a helping hand. That should be able to make him turn over a new page and start a new part of his life. And that's this is something that you can it's narratively very, very cathartic. I should say that, right? But the problem with this is that you can tell, like, you've been following this person long enough, you can tell that this is incorrect. Like, like, for instance, I can say that, what are my own failures that you're privy to on this channel? Like, I started an organization in 2019 that, let's be honest, it failed, right? But with other friends in 2022, we started another organization that has, by all measures, partially succeeded, right? And okay, that's progress, right? And if I didn't have that, I would just tell you that it was a failure. But because we have these people's careers, and because the internet has no memory, or it has perfect memory, I should say, and the documentary can just go through it and highlight it, you see Boogie failing, confessing, failing again, confessing, failing again, confessing. And and it's not just like human weakness. Obviously, I'm a Catholic. I understand that all human existence is confession, failure. But you really begin to question whether these attempts at sinning no more are really genuine. And what you get the sense of that these are all false confessions. These confessions, like the Francis character, are a way that Boogie can externalize his own moral responsibility and make himself part of the joke. And I don't believe that I'm actually seeing a genuine effort on his part to change his behavior. It's very, very hard to believe. He's not a dumb person. How could he not have the amount of self-control it takes to just not purchase video games for a year? There was the budget had $400 or $500 of video games on the budget, with a person that has $700 in the bank account on top of his essential needs. How much self-control would it take to just not eat at fast food restaurants ever? That's really, really easy, because it saves your budget and it also saves your health. All of these things are just really, really simple things that seem like they're a button press away from happening. And there's no way that he could communicate the level of self-awareness he's communicating in his confessions and then not take those simple steps to try to iteratively move forward to show that there's some sincerity there. And so, and it makes you feel like incredibly self-conscious in this moment, because you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, what about my flaws here? And everyone does this. Everyone who creates content, you probably realize, I mean, how many times have you heard me tell you about the atheist versus Christian debates? I mean, that's like virtually every one of my shows. That's used as an example of my broader thesis, or the atheist versus Christian debates. So everyone is aware that because we are finite organisms, and because we have a limited amount of experiences to draw on, and because we have things that we like talking about and like illustrating, YouTube content and content generally, if it's not highly polished, like a new essay or a speech I'm giving, it has kind of a cyclical nature to it. We recycle our own bits a lot. We have to do this in order to keep live stream culture working. And if you want more edited videos and less live streams, and I make edited videos not infrequently, like once every month, if you count the Substack essays that appear on my thing that I read. If you... It prioritizes live streams, but in order to keep the continuous content churn going, there's a certain amount of repetition, and because of that, we are all very aware as content creators that we are in kind of a cycle. We are in kind of explaining problems over again from new perspectives. And so the fact that this is in Boogie 298, a very, very pathological and a self-destructive cycle, there isn't a YouTuber out there that isn't kind of trying to convince themselves when they're saying this that there's not a similar iteration going on in their own lives. And this also gets me to the other uncomfortable part of the documentary, which is just this Boogie 298 at some point, he basically is like, he plays board games all the time with his friends, which is my vice, right? Magic the Gathering, which is my vice, right? All of these things like Warhammer, and you see him to go to the game shop, and you see him spend money and when he goes to the game shop, he's around all of these other guys that look exactly like him. They may not be as sad as he is. They obviously don't have 4 million subscribers on YouTube that they could be utilizing, but they all look similarly like sad sacks who have no future, and this is just the place they are. And obviously, having been to many game shops in my era, being a guy who plays occasional nerdy board games, who has his life somewhat more in order, I can tell you that not all people who play these games are like that, obviously, but I can't say I don't know what he's talking about. I can't say that I don't see the same thing in these circles that I attend when I have a free evening, when I take a night off every now and again. And then Boogie holds up Magic the Gathering and says, "This is my crack. This is my heroin." What heroin was to Mitch Hedberg, who's a famous comedian from the early 2000s that OD'd, and I saw him actually in concert just before he died. It's one of the few stand-up comic shows that I actually saw. He was a really good guy. He looked a lot like Kurt Cobain, and he died of very similar, not exactly, obviously Kurt Cobain was suicide, but he had a very similar problem with heroin use, which eventually killed him in an OD. And Boogie 2988 is, he's not lying. He was killed by nerd culture. And then that's the other way that he's like every millennial. Every millennial is kind of convinced, it's kind of weird, right? Because nerd culture is it obviously, and this is the serious part of the conversation. This is the meta portion of, I'm going to do a deep dive on this concept. Nerd culture is kind of like the perfect vice of the millennial man, in that it is simultaneously an identity and a language and a pastime and a drug. And so for millennials who are kind of more high agency or high IQ, this is just a way of connecting to other guys and connecting to other people who like having their mind chew on something in the background. For myself and Magic the Gathering, we're going to talk about this in more depth. I love being able to kind of analyze the meta of a game and kind of take it apart analytically and then interact with other guys who are doing the exact same thing. And I always remember, in my former town that I lived in, when I kind of briefly during COVID painted a Warhammer army, this was a dad hobby. Dads would get together in this highly progressive community. We'd have a beer and we talk about our kids, and we would move little soldiers across a card table in the garage. And every single guy I played with was a dad and a professional. And we talked about our concerns for the future. We talked about history. We talked about the Warhammer. I mean, this is the thing, right? And I got out of this game. I got out of it. Like, I played more than 3 games in my entire life. Like, this is a serious part of my identity. But no, I never played again because I went to a different town. And the people who played this game were like, they were like Boogie 2988. They were like man children who like playing with toys. And I didn't, that wasn't what I signed up for. I signed up to go out with other dads who didn't want to have a female dominated hobby and shoot the shit about something that wasn't the end of the world for 2 hours. Not to kind of, participate in this set of Arrested Development, right? And that was why Gamergate was essentially, that was the pivotal moment of the millennial generation. That's what sort of shattered the illusion. It was actually the other foot dropping from the financial crisis. The financial crisis ended the idea that all millennials would be golden children, that we would be richer than their parents were. But every millennial in their heart of hearts believed somehow, and I believe this too, even though I know it's to be false, right? I did a whole video series on nerd culture explaining why this is false. But every millennial in their heart of hearts believed that somehow deep down inside, the nerd stuff that they liked, their specific television shows that they liked, the specific anime that they watched, the specific fandom they belonged to, this simultaneously defined them, established them as a particularly intelligent individual, and promised them in some sense that the future belonged to them. This is a large amount of the appeal of Boogie 2988, right? Boogie 298's appeal in the Upworthy era was this idea that you could be the biggest, fattest loser ever, but still, because the fact that you were a nerd, you were into all of these, these very intellectual properties like the Legend of Zelda and Star Wars, that you are still going to be on Team We Win. You are still part of the coalition of the Ascendant. And so your story would be one of humble origins, being overweight and fat and picked on and bullied, to being, a person who at the end of the day proved to everyone else that he was somebody who really needed to be listened to, who really had something to say, who was going places. And that was the story of Boogie 2988 that gave him 4 million subscribers. And that's why his downfall was so catastrophic. It's that once it was obvious that his success was simply a prelude to him becoming a loser again, then what did you watch? You watched a loser get a winning lottery ticket and then squander it all on stupid nerd shit and then fall back into ignominy again. And that was that. No one wanted to be part of that story. And furthermore, Gamergate, you could argue that Sargon and Gamergate in many ways killed Boogie 2988. And there are casualties in war and some are very tragic, but Boogie 298 is a tragic casualty of the war, of the Gamergate wars. And Bob Chipman could be kind of like his Sith version of Boogie 2988, right? Because in Gamergate, it was very, very apparent that there was no ideology of being a nerd. It was always presumed that being a nerd was being part of the progressive coalition. After Gamergate, being a nerd was no longer a proper part of the progressive coalition, and you're either going to bend the knee to rank progressivism, put explicitly as text into every one of your products, where most of the people who stayed on the mainstream nerd bandwagon, or you were going to be in some form a dissident. Maybe a distant, like, the Adam and Sitch crowd, where you're still pretending to be a centrist, a 90s liberal, and are hoping that things are going to kind of revert back to the good times for some reason. Maybe you're going to drink, you're going to take the deep red pill and find out how deep this rabbit hole goes, And you're going to be like myself and now Sargon and a variety of other people who were actually trying to get to the bottom of this modern problem and figure out what's actually wrong, and are therefore and subsequently can no longer convince themselves that this being a nerd is sufficient to actually being somebody who the future is promised to, because it's very obviously not. This is sort of the sad state that we find ourselves in, is that we've all kind of convinced ourselves in our childhood that our toys would grant us a strange kind of immortality. It's bizarre. It's almost like the boxers thinking that the shirt, the shirt would protect them from the bullets of the imperialists, or the ghost dancers. They believed they had magic shawls that would protect them from the cavalry's bullets, which was obviously not true in Wounded Knee. In the heart of every nerd in the 1990s was the belief that if you were a Star Wars fan, that proved that you were a really smart, intellectual person who was not like the jocks, who was destined to have a university education and would minimally be part of the lower middle class. You'd have your own house. You were part of the elect. This is just not true. And now we're sitting here trying to figure out how poisonous all this shit is and trying to kind of get over it, right? And this is kind of what I'm thinking to myself here, with Boogie 2988, is there a healthy way to kind of consume these games? Is this all something that we have to kind of give up, this nerd culture stuff? I'd like to obviously think it's not, and I'm reminded, and this is true for both actually social media. I mean, Boogie 298 was destroyed by social media. Boogie 2988 was destroyed by nerd culture. These were all false promises. What makes these things false and destructive for Boogie 2988, but not necessarily for someone else? I'd like to think there are some success stories on the internet. I think Sargon is kind of a success story. I mean, his life certainly looks a lot more upstanding now than it did back when he first started doing this. He's become a patriarch figure, and you could say that he hasn't gone far enough to the right. A lot of people do. What he is reasonable. What he is listening. What he is responsible for his own mind and responsible for his own family, and in many ways a worthy role model for a lot of young guys. Certainly better than most of the people you have online these days. I guess you could say, alternatively, PewDiePie. I mean, he's somebody who's made this work for himself. He was a video game streamer. He was like the original Twitch streamer before there was Twitch. What happened? I mean, he was a loser who played video games in his parents' basement. Now he's married to an Italian woman who's really attractive, and they have a son. He's a father. He's a patriarch. That's a success story, right? That's a success story. And that's nerd culture, too. That's the same things that we're talking about having killed Boogie 2988. There are questions about these things. There are questions about how you use things, how you interact with spaces and games that determine what they actually do for you. This is a concept that I'm trying to develop called the meta. I've been trying to work on this idea of the meta, and this is what all of these lectures you're getting in the Fiddler's Green podcast, or just me. I have an essay idea. It's too half-baked. I don't have time to polish it, so I'm just taking all the ingredients I can't use and dumping them on the live stream so you can deal with my half-baked ideas here. But there's a great movie from I can't remember if it's the early 1990s or the late 1980s. It's a very young Matthew Broderick, just after Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's called War Games. I think most people know this one because it's such an internet meme. But the movie largely focuses on a computer hacker who hacks into a government mainframe and interacts with a supercomputer there and starts playing video games with this computer. And he wants to just kind of see what video games the government has, right? The government has all of these war games prepped for it. And one of them is, the main one is called Global Thermonuclear War. And the problem, the main plot kind of ridiculously, is that he's hacked into this artificial intelligence's core level. And what he thinks that he's harnessing a supercomputer used by the American government to manage their systems, and he's asking it to play a game. But really what he's doing is interacting with their artificial intelligence at its core subconscious level. And it thinks that this game it's playing with this guy is a real global thermonuclear war. And obviously you can imagine the kind of Doctor Strangelove situation that evolves from these things, right? The computer starts trying to launch real nukes at the Russians, or at least prepares to. And at the end of the story, right, he's in the control room while the computer is automatically firing these nuclear weapons, or starting to fire these nuclear ICBMs at the Russians and kicking off the end of the world. And the Matthew I can't remember if it's the scientist or the Matthew Broderick character says, well, I know how to get him to stop. And he gets the computer to stop by playing tic-tac-toe. And obviously everyone knows that tic-tac-toe, I can't remember if it's always a cats game. It's either always a cats game, or it's always whoever plays first wins, right? It's either cats game or plays first wins, no matter what you play in tic-tac-toe. It's limited amount of options, right? And by playing tic-tac-toe, the computer understands that tic-tac-toe is exactly like global thermonuclear war. That no matter what you do when you play tic-tac-toe, you always lose. And no matter what you do, a perfect game of global thermonuclear war always ends in mutual annihilation. And the computer says, a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. The only winning move is not to play. And this is the movie's kind of corny and cheesy in 1980s, but this is it harps on a core element of all things, of all concepts, of all situations we engage in, which is that the most important elements of any system are the implicit elements that lie outside of the system. The decision whether you want to play this game or not, or what are the parameters of winning this game? What actually controls whether this game is fun or not? What are people looking to get out of this game? Is the only winning move to play video games not to play them? Is the only winning move to play the only winning move for interacting with nerd culture not to play nerd culture? Is the only winning move to politics not to play politics? Is the only winning move for the internet and social media not to engage with it at all? That would be a bitter pill to swallow for myself. This kind of brings me to this concept of meta environments, or metas. I'll kill the video capture here at this stage. So meta environments are meta. So if we have a thing that we're talking about, whether it's a game or whether it's a social media or whether it's an organization, this is going to have a certain number of qualities to it that are not part of its formality. So a formal organization is the actual rules that you need to participate in the organization. It would be like the laws in government, or the Constitution in the United States government, or it would be the actual rules of the game itself, or the actual thing, the actual object in the form of a computer, the actual software when it comes to playing a video game. The meta is everything around this thing that is not the thing itself. It is what governs its creation. It's a set of prescriptions that manages how you actually use it. And it's almost always implicit or informal, that stands outside of the thing itself. And moreover, it governs people's relationships to the thing socially and psychologically. And I should add here too, at core, it's teleological. Now, this is everyone knows that one of my kind of favorite online punching bags is Matt McManus, the professor of political science he's at University of Michigan. He's a hard person not to respond to because he teaches at a school where I spent many a year and got a degree from and remember very fondly. And he has, he's very similar age to mine, and he has a very similar background, a very similar millennial background. And his big thing in his academic work is being anti-teleological, which is just utter ridiculous shit, because it's utter bullshit, because he's a complete moralist. In all of his prescriptions, in all of his descriptions of politics, he lapses into moralistic language frequently. He's not some kind of nihilistic descriptor like Nietzsche or Machiavelli who wants to strip all moralistic language out of the description of anything. He can't even pretend to be that kind of person because every one of his pronouncements is kind of highly hysterical, like highly morally hysterical, like all millennials and in particular millennial women. And so I'm sure, if you read his work, he has some super specific concept of teleology, but that defines it as different from just pure morality. But all this is just completely ridiculous because once you have redefined teleology such that you can say, well, my moralism is not teleological, but your moralism is teleological. You've kind of broken the word teleological beyond any purpose of reconstructing it. It becomes meaningless at that stage. It becomes a connotation as being kind of bad. You've created a straw man version of teleology. For those of you who are wondering what the sort of basic definition, teleology is, it's obviously a pre-Aristotelian concept, but it's most famously talked about by Aristotle as being one of the principal ways something is said to be caused. And a teleological cause is the thing that it's meant for. It's the thing that it's meant to accomplish. So you can, and this is sort of, I don't want to say it's linked to Platonism, but it sounds almost like a Platonistic concept that things have an eternally perfect form, that they are the representation of. Like a triangle is an imperfect version of a perfect form of the triangle. Well, in the same way, you could say that all objects have that which they're designed for. So, and this is obviously borrowed in Christian ideology. Like the purpose of man is to glorify God. That is, the teleology of man is to glorify God. And to that end, all moral propositions flow. But the problem is that once you designate some moralities as being non-teleological and some moralities as being teleological, is this kind of meaningless because all moral systems, because they speak in terms of should, imply a teleology. And all teleologies, because they speak in terms of things being designed for a purpose, since they speak in terms of purpose and goal, they have an implicit morality associated with them. So just as linguistically, God always implies teleology, and teleology always implies morality, and morality always implies God, once you separate one of these concepts from each other, you end up with sort of these facile versions of them that don't really represent anything that people really believe in any way, shape, or form. And that's the thing with teleology is that, but okay, so, and obviously Matt wants to get rid of this thing. This is a digression here. He wants to get rid of teleology because he sees this as being a way that people can import moralism, specifically an Aristotelian moralism, and create hierarchies. So he sees getting rid of teleology as a way to get rid of hierarchies, which is utterly ridiculous because this is like saying like, oh, we'll blow up. We can get rid of all cockroaches by blowing up the earth or something like that. Yeah, sure, right? And then this is very expedient. This is sort of the new atheist way. We'll get rid. You have to prove everything to absolute certainty, to absolute mathematical certainty, in order for it to be real. And by doing that, we'll prove that God doesn't exist and that Christian morality can't justify itself. Well, yeah, but by that standard, you've disproven all morality, and the same thing is true for teleology. All you're doing is creating a universal solvent and then implying that the universal solvent only dissolves your opponent's ideas and not your own. And then you use some hand-waving argument from John Rawls that makes absolutely no sense to save your own preferred moral system and all that bullshit. The problem is that let's leave aside over whether teleology actually exists in a metaphysical sense, like it's actually a real thing. Regardless of whether teleology exists as a real concept in the universe, as implied by God, teleology is an incredibly useful concept when you're talking about organizations, when you're talking about metapolitics, when you're talking about things' ultimate ends. I mean, a great example is how I'm going to be using meta and meta environments here. So whenever you have something like nerd culture or video game culture or sports or games or social media, what we'll see in all of these things is that there is an implicit idea of what these things are for. There is an implicit, you could say that the teleology of these systems evolved organically. But in every single meta environment, in every single meta of a game or meta of a subculture or meta of a social network, there is something that social network is designed to generate ultimately, and that generates in the person itself. So with these metas and with the ability to talk about these meta environments and these things teleologically, we're able to unlock a huge amount of understanding of how these things actually behave. I'll get into some examples. I know this is horribly abstract, right? I'm preloading my theory slides here. So, given that we've defined meta as being implicit prescriptions that orient people psychologically to something and that teleologically define an object, right? What often are some qualities of meta rules or meta prescriptions? Well, but they're usually almost more important than the actual rules. They behave kind of like languages. I'll say that too, right? When you describe something as a meta, when you describe a meta game of a sport or the meta game of a social media or the meta game of a social culture, you're almost talking about it like a language. It defines what you can do and can't do, and the ideas that you can communicate to other people inside this game or inside this social environment. And subsequently, it molds and teaches users. The meta of an environment will very, very slowly make you more into this kind of person. I think this will get a little bit clearer when we get to the examples. And ultimately, in the teleological, I should say this first, whenever we talk about the thing, I was talking to an older guy, and he mentioned that his son liked video games, and he said, this is back in my late 20s, and I was working this is just after I stopped playing video games right when BioShock Infinite came out. And he said something to the effect, well, my son's really into video games. And I said, you like video games? And I said, well, I really like talking about video games more than I like playing them. So I always read about video games. This is true because I kind of stopped playing AAA video games other than online board games, which I don't really count, I guess. Maybe I should count those. But I think I talked endlessly about Battlefield and the development of new Half-Life games, and I knew all the jokes about Valve and Half-Life, even though I hadn't really played those games. I was talking endlessly about them. And the guy says, well, I think actually that's the reason why my son likes playing video games too, so we can talk about them. And what he meant was that the son liked participating in the meta of the video game. The son liked participating in the meta culture of the video game. Meta determines what people talk about when they talk about the thing when they're not doing it. Largely too, metas are what someone gets from the thing. They're what you ultimately take away. And that's why I say that they're teleological. And that's why I think it's so important to understand objects as having a teleology, because it allows you, in the teleological step, although it's sort of quintessentially not a material analysis, it allows you to pop out of the framework itself of the thing and ask, okay, what does this ultimately give me as a person, right? I mean, I wish Boogie 2988 would look at nerd culture. What did nerd culture ultimately give me? Well, it gave you a false sense of superiority. It gave you a false sense that everything would be all right. It lulled you into an illusion, and it gave you friends that encouraged that illusion. And I mean, briefly, it gave you a 4 million subscriber YouTube channel. I guess that's the upside to it. But I think that, if Boogie 2988 did a meta-analysis of his relationship with these things that was sincere, he'd realize that ultimately this is something that's very destructive to his own life. Some things, I should get onto okay, what are some examples of meta, right? Some things have very, very simple metas, right? So metas of games are the easiest thing to discuss. So I'm going to start there and then move on to social organizations and social networks. So I should say that the metas of games are the absolute easiest to talk about. So the absolute easiest meta that you could talk about would be the meta of going to the gym. It's so ridiculously simple. There is no meta. Games is the meta. I mean, there is sort of a meta culture of bodybuilding and gym bro culture. Talking about gains and squats and ass to grass and all that lingo right there. That's fun, but no one's deceived about the purpose of going to the gym. It's intimately connected to the purpose of going to the gym. And but you even go a little bit above just going to the gym. So how successful is going to the gym? Well, it's to get fit, right? And if you're not getting fit going to the gym, you're not doing it right. You're something fundamentally wrong is going on. But if you go even a little bit beyond that, you'll have a much more And I never, I should say before I go into the sports thing, I have never met a gym bro that's lost sight of that. I never met a gym bro who's like, oh yeah, I just started going to the gym and then I kind of lost track about how much weight I was putting up. I kind of lost track of my cardiovascular. Like that became less important than just going to the gym itself. And maybe there's people who do this. Maybe there are gym rats who don't actually monitor their health, or that don't actually understand that this is to get more healthy or a more physically fit body. But it's very, very rare because the meta rules and the explicit rules are so obviously connected at the hip that no one could ever confuse them. Another good example, you can deviate this just a little bit, and you can immediately see how you get to a more complicated situation, is with sports. And Johan Kurtz did an excellent article about his frustrations with spectator sports and how they had become detached from the initial teleology of sports itself. And, a great example of this in my own mind is football. And, football is something that, it's something that I really hated it in high school. And then in college, when I was at Michigan, I was really into it. And I followed the Michigan games, even though during my time there, they sucked. And for a few years after, I followed college football. And it was really fun. And it's just, it's a very delightful game. Europeans put this game down all the time. But what's so fun about football is that it's incredibly martial. There's an unmistakable dimension where it's just, okay, we're going to have like the simulation of a war. And it simulates war much better than other games like soccer or baseball. And, with soccer, it always feels like you're watching a certain type of person, a certain type of person who's good at running and good at kicking. And everyone on the field is kind of similar. They're all very bright. That's usually a myth. Athletes are almost universally very bright people, with some exceptions, right? Or I should say that they're bright in at least one area, and most of them are bright across the board because, as we know now, one of the Reddit lies that have long since perished, intelligence in one area usually correlates with intelligence in other areas, right? This is, there is a halo effect that is very, very real and not subject of our psychological imaginations. But football has more elements of war in that it's very, very tactical. And when you watch a football team in operation, like an army, you're watching like a medley of different kinds of people, like linemen who are really strong and runners who are really fast. And then the quarterback, who's kind of like the sergeant who has to put it all together. He has to read the tactical moves and has to make the decision right at the right moment. And then, it all comes together and it works or it doesn't. And it works as a team. And as such, like drilling is important in all sports, right? But drilling as sort of a unit is it has a very martial dimension in football in particular. And as such, football is sort of I find it a very delightful sport, even though I've not watched it in a decade at this stage. I'm totally out of the loop, right? But I always felt that the meta of football was and Johan Kurtz does a much better job of explaining this in his essay, and everyone should go read it at the Becoming Noble Substack. But I will echo the thing here is that football was really never better than it was in college. It was better on sort of the meta level because more of the tactical dimension was left intact, because players had to have a long career, and because there was a large asymmetry in a lot of the matchings, and there were always holes in various teams. There was a huge tactical dimension where people had to figure out, okay, what is this defense weak against? Where is it falling apart? There was this whole tactic that quarterbacks pulled called the spread, right? Which is a tactic where you sort of read the field as it was evolving. And that's what high school and college football was all organized around. And in NFL football, that really doesn't exist very much because there's no weak parts. There's no like absolutely weak parts inside of a defensive line, inside a professional NFL football that has millions of dollars to spend on players, and they can hire them for 2-year contracts and then discard them, right? There's also a dimension of football that was intimately connected. The reason why college football is good is that it's intimately connected to a place that you went to school, whereas modern NFL teams are completely mercenary. And so, there's a dimension where football was healthier, had a healthier meta, earlier in its career, and as it has become professionalized, it's kind of almost died as a spectator sport. Not just, I never actually played football other than, just at the playground in junior high with my last actual game of football I ever played. It was never my sport in high school, obviously. I played like for a year on the tennis team, and then I got cut because I suck. Yeah, I could make the team for 1 year before getting cut. That's how I'm on the verge of sucking, but not quite, right? A game that I think had a much healthier professional meta, but that eventually died. And I think this is kind of, metas can become instantly observable in how they die. Right? You only really understand a meta when it dies, and football was the quintessential meta of having a limited number of guys with a certain number of strengths and weaknesses that came together inside a certain locality, usually a school, and played another set of guys with a certain set of strengths and weaknesses representing a different area. And the meta of football was, can one set of guys work together as a lost island of toys, and patch their weaknesses up better, and then in the moment read the other guy's weaknesses long enough to exploit them. And that's what determined the football game, right? And it was very much like war, and the more it was like war in its defects, the more it became something that was interesting, and the less it became like war, and the more it became like a professional organization, the more it fell apart. And I do think that the NFL, which is a much shorter-lived organization, it's a much newer organization than professional baseball in America. I do think that the NFL, in many ways, killed football in a lot of ways, and it led to kind of the ESPN culture we have now. Similarly, for baseball, baseball had a much longer professional life, it had a much longer life as a culture of professional spectator sports that had some amount of vivacity to it, that had some amount of connection to the earth. There's always that famous line in City Slickers, which is this horribly degenerate baby boomers movie that's kind of depressing, but it perfectly characterizes the baby boomer generation's understanding of itself, and it's kind of an interesting historical artifact for that reason. But one of the monologues is, a woman asks a guy, why do you like baseball so much? Why do you memorize all the stats? And he says, well, it's because it was the one way that I connected with my father. When I was a teenager and he was an older guy and we all hated each other, we could always talk about baseball. We could always talk about baseball and we could bond over that. And that's something that I always want to have with me. And, obviously memorizing sports stats was a huge part of baseball because, and this is one thing, is that baseball has a wonderful live spectator culture and that it's fun to watch a baseball game live. It's horrible to watch on television because it moves too slowly. But because of the nature of series and the fact that there's a very predictable pattern of play and it's much less chaotic than football, statistics and understanding the game at a macro level is something that any ordinary person can do and can intuit. It's very arguable, and a lot of people have argued, that baseball spectator culture has been killed off by Moneyball, which is sort of hard machine learning algorithms being brought in and really making a lot of the decisions that used to be made intuitively by coaches and scouts. And here right now I have a famous picture from the Brad Pitt movie called Moneyball, where they bring the Jonah Hill character in, who's always playing the same character that Jonah Hill plays, in order to do statistical analysis on baseball. And they have this room full of scouts, and they're all talking about who they can recruit. And they're talking over like bullshit things about they watch these people play, and he's like, well, we need him because he's a very confident swinger. He's a very confident swinger. He has a good poise. He holds himself with a certain amount of poise. And by the end of this, I think they're kind of taking they're not. I don't think they're taking a swing at these scouts. I know that the point of this movie is to mock scouts and their intuitions. By the end of their little rundown of the players, they're literally saying, oh, we can't hire this person because he has an ugly girlfriend. And the ugly girlfriend means that he has low self-confidence, and that means that he doesn't actually believe in himself, and he won't play very well in the future because he doesn't believe that he can. Well, that's fine. That's sort of a mockery. And eventually they bring on these numbers guys, and I should say this, I'm a numbers guy myself, who model the whole game, and they break it down to like 5 metrics. And it doesn't matter what they do, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter how they hold themselves, it just matters how often they get on base. And then like 4 other stats, and then from these stats, you can find the players that are undervalued, and you can purchase them. The problem with this is that it ruins the meta of the game. The whole meta of the game in baseball is to look at the people who are playing, look at how they hold themselves, look at how they look at themselves in the team, because baseball is a collective sport, but it's essentially a 1-to-1 contest of pitcher versus batter. And the whole bonding exercise that men had watching baseball was very much the same exercise that you see being mocked in the scout scene in Moneyball. And so when you have the Moneyball logic come in, you really see baseball deconstructing its own vigor as a spectator sport. Baseball should be, in its meta, at core, it should be about the confidence and personality of the pitcher versus the confidence and personality of the batter in the moment. And if it deviates from that human element, then the actual physical rules, the fact that you can play Moneyball with baseball is kind of immaterial. The problem with baseball is that Moneyball destroys the meta narrative about what baseball as a spectator sport is supposed to be delivering to the audience. Baseball as a spectator sport is supposed to be delivering to a spectator audience, I guess, the illusion that in this moment of watching a person face down a batter or facing a pitcher from the other end, you are seeing into their soul. You are seeing who they are as men and how they hold themselves. And this is the moment of truth. And you develop by watching an intuition for how the team behaves in certain circumstances and how the team is going to develop over the course of the season and so on and so forth, right? That's the meta of the game. And that's what you're taking from the game. And that's why men watch baseball, and they believe that they were understanding themselves better as men while they were watching it. But Moneyball, in some sense, destroys that, right? So you could say like the meta is destroyed by Moneyball. Similar games I'm going to discuss here too is chess and Go. Now, here I'm going to deviate. What is the meta of chess? I mean, well, the meta of chess, obviously, for the longest time, it was perceived as being kind of a contest of intellect. So, I mean, insofar as wrestling is a contest of strength of the muscle, chess is a contest of strength of the mind. And so the contest of strength of the mind is that you're just trying to kind of see who has the stronger ability to see into the future, to intuitively understand the game, and to map your impression of the game onto your plan for victory. There's no randomity in chess or in Go, and because of that, it's a very hard. It becomes an interesting intellectual competition. And okay, so well, chess obviously had a very, very hard setback when, in the mid 1990s, very early in the computer age, Deep Blue beat the grandmaster Garry Kasparov. And okay, well, does this mean chess is over as a metagame? Well, maybe not. And then people are like, oh, well, Go. And there's a few other variants of chess, including one, was it Amigo or something like that? Someone at the event this last weekend was telling me about the meta of a variant of chess that was designed to be sort of computationally frustrating. And Go is like that. Go is a deterministic game that can be beaten by looking into the future. And for a while, it was sort of undeterminable by computers because it's sort of computationally frustrating up front. And of course, eventually neural networks crack these games because what the neural network's strategy is to sort of recognize what good game states are. And once it has a sort of ability to reference a dictionary of good game states, then they can just map positioning from those states to the other ones. So it doesn't need to computationally overwhelm itself, even though you could argue that just recognizing good board states and then mapping in between them in the same way that Chat GPT maps a chat dialogue. That's not actually an intuitive understanding of what the game is. It still works enough for these kind of deterministically computational games. Now, does that mean that the chess meta is destroyed? I'm not so sure. I don't think it actually is. First of all, I don't think that, you could argue, okay, do detractors invalidate the meta of competitive weightlifting or wrestling? No one can out wrestle a tractor, right? So there's that, right? So when you're doing chess, you're doing intellectual weightlifting to a certain degree. So there's that dimension, right? Cars don't invalidate the meta of the foot race. And so there's that dimension where you're seeing how the human muscles can be can be cultivated in a certain way, and for that the game is still interesting. But even at that level, when you're playing a chess against another human, you are not doing what Deep Blue did. You're not looking into the future and just computing all sorts of various eventualities, and you're not even doing what neural networks do. You're not just like mapping all possible good board states, figuring out what the fingerprint is, and then mapping the course of action that leads in between those fingerprints, and then doing it like for billions of them using like these aggregated networks via AlphaGo or whatever, right? You're not even doing that. When you're playing an opponent in chess or Go, it is a highly psychological experience. What you're trying to do is you're trying to fundamentally intuit your opponent's plan for the game, figure out the move that he doesn't want you to make, and then make that move. So even in a completely deterministic game, there's a psychological dimension to it. So regardless of the fact that AlphaGo has, has completely is going to be a better Go player than any Go player, although I've heard sometimes that it can fail because of the fact that its map isn't so good, and the fact that there's an intuitive element that it just will never get from the game. Despite the fact that these large neural networks can outdo human players, this will always be an eternally interesting meta because of the fact that when humans play these games, it is a contest of strength, it is a contest of will, and it is a contest of psychology. The computer does not have a psychology, so it is eternally uninteresting to figure out how to out-psychologize a neural network. You're trying to exploit a weakness, but you're not trying to out-psychologize it. So for that reason, these will always, and I guess you could say the same thing about baseball. It doesn't matter how much people moneyball it, right? You can still just ignore the moneyball and participate in what it meant to be a baseball fan, thinking that the way you're thinking about the game is exactly the same way that the scouts and the managers and the coaches are thinking about the game, right? You can still do that. In the same way, and chess players will tell this to you, people who really love chess will tell this to you, it's a deeply psychological game, and it's a deeply human game when it's played against a human. And part of the meta of the game is to grapple with the kind of person you're playing. And that's what you take. I said, what do you take away from baseball and football? In football, you take away a simulacra of war that bonds you to the place, whether it's the college or the locality, in the way that Johan Kurz elaborated in his thing about professional sports. What do you take away from baseball as a spectator? The war stuff, a little bit less so, but also sort of like the intuition, the understanding of the man, the person when they're at bat. What do you take away from chess? What you take away from chess is like an arm wrestling competition but a mental arm wrestling competition with another man who also has a limited number of computation cycles in his brain. And you're trying, as with an arm wrestle, you're trying to figure out, are you getting tired? Are you going all in? Are you holding back? Are you trying to get me to tire? Is this where we push our hardest? Or do I need to conserve my energy? And I can conserve my energy the best by using my psychology to read what you're planning and then plan accordingly to counteract that. That is the meta of chess, and it's entirely undisrupted by the existence of AI, I would argue, if it's approached in the proper way. Another game, and these are games that I like a little bit more, are the games of chance, and this this sort of brings in the element of psychology altogether. The psychology of poker, the psychology of blackjack. These games of chance are played numerically with probabilities. So already they're kind of fun because of the fact that you can always just get lucky and win. You can always just get lucky and win a hand of blackjack or a hand of poker. And obviously you can count cards, and if you're really, really good these days, if you can count cards and memorize states, and you can turn the tables on the people you're playing against, and you can actually get good at poker. But good poker, like blackjack, is literally just a matter of counting cards because there's no bluffing in that. But poker, because of the existence of bluffing and the existence of kind of intuitively understanding the game, for lack of a better word, becomes a much more tactical game. You have to kind of incorporate a psychological understanding of your opponents and also a psychological understanding of yourself when playing it. There's this phrase that comes from poker called tilting. And this is something that my wife has adopted for her own channel when it comes to board games. People in other board games usually use it to indicate that you're just getting upset. Like you're literally, you're literally like having a spur out on your opponent or tossing the cards across the room or whatever. Tilting in poker really just means a player that's lost psychological control and composure over his own state, and he's making decisions that are meant to be cathartic and meant to be sort of self-medicating, right? So a tilt in a game of poker was like you lost 4 hands in a row based on pure bad luck, and now the 5th one comes up and you over ante because you're just so sick of losing that you convince yourself that that you have to win this last hand. That's a tilting move, right? You're not playing this as an emotion, as an individual that's trying to properly interpret his emotions and read his opponent. You're playing this game as a person who needs to win to make himself feel better. Poker, I would argue, the meta of poker is about overcoming the tilting state inside yourself and trying to push forward to something that's more tactical inside yourself. Here also, I kind of want to bring on a discussion of video games. Maybe I should go forward to board games, but video games are another one. This is another thing too. I mean, obviously video games have meta in the sense that people play them for various reasons. What are the reasons that people play video games? I've always had a hard time playing role-playing games. I'll say this for you, and the reason why I've had a hard time playing board role-playing games is on the computer, is I never really understood the meta. And to tell you the truth, I have never really enjoyed board games when they're played in, or role-playing games, pardon me, when they're played in casual circles. And I kind of like the idea of Dungeons and Dragons. I kind of like the idea of sitting down with a paper and pen and drawing out a world and having this fun storytelling thing that you do with your friends. But whenever I do it, I don't really enjoy it because my mind doesn't work this way. It's not very commensurate with the role-playing game meta. And this is a similar thing for the whole World of Warcraft sort of hard RPG sandbox thing. The meta seems to be to create a world and to participate in it and to kind of get absorbed into the world. And this is a meta that I can't really get on board, I guess. It's kind of been a frustrating one for myself, and one that I fundamentally distrust, because at the end of a role-playing session and at the end of I should put it this way. I don't like talking about fantasy worlds that I participate in, either in a video game or I like talking about books that I've read. I like talking about plot elements in fantasy. I like talking about history. But I can't possibly imagine talking about or the fiction that appears in a role-playing game like World of Warcraft, or the fiction that appears from a tabletop game like Dungeons and Dragons. It's never really... It always feels horribly self-conscious, and it feels like I'm halfway between being a theater kid and halfway between being someone who's actually trying to win a board game. Let's talk about another meta that I actually do understand and get a little bit better and can put a finer point on. Magic the Gathering. The reason why I love this game so much is that it's kind of a combination of a variety of other things like chess, poker, and Dungeons and Dragons type games. And the creator of, and we can talk about what's in the process of killing the meta of Magic the Gathering. And I should have put this as part of my slides, but I did an entire presentation on Magic the Gathering previously. And it was an interesting stream where I talked about the history of the game. But the most interesting thing that came out of it was that the designer itself came up with archetypes of players. And he said there's 3 reasons that people play this game, and we're going to give them names. Timmy is the player that plays because he is looking to experience something. Johnny is somebody, he's the person who appreciates the role-playing and thematic aspect of the game. Johnny is a person who's playing to try to see if he can mess around with the game like an engineer would mess around with a machine. I wonder if the game could do this. I wonder if we could break the meta by doing this. What if I could be the first person who made this kind of playstyle work? He's kind of like a cook or a chef. And then Spike is the last archetype of player. He's trying to honestly win the game like you would a chess game. He's the person who's having the arm wrestling competition that's taking place in paper. He's trying to make the game work for him so that he can win and be victorious and be the stronger person. And one of the successes of Magic is they realized very, very early on that this was the meta of Magic the Gathering. That this was that the meta was essentially attempting to balance these 3 things in turn. Now, I will say that this is ultimately the undoing of Magic the Gathering, because ultimately it was very, very apparent that the money was really in exploiting Timmy. So what and this is, I'll say this here too. This is part of the meta of Magic the Gathering, is that the game is built from your own personal collection of cards. And this is something that I learned early on, and I always thought this was the worst part of Magic the Gathering. I'll confess my own archetype here. I'm basically, when it comes to Magic the Gathering, a Johnny player. I like messing around with the game like it's a machine. I like to see if this can work, if that can work, if I can make this kind of weird deck archetype work, if I can literally play Moneyball with the game and see if I can kind of get out of it something new and interesting. The problem is that, and the problem for Johnny players is that the game is essentially a pay-to-win game. It's played from people's personal collections, which have to be purchased. Decks have to be purchased. And, there's cheaper formats, and I play cheaper formats because you can play them for pennies, right? And it's the same game. You have the same kind of Johnny dynamics and the same Spike dynamics going on in these formats, and they're perfectly fun for a lot of people. But they're not what keeps the game going. What keeps the game going is people they associate with these cards. And this is something that I noticed in Boogie 2988. Like, he has all of these cards. He doesn't play with them, but he associates them with them as their identity. And I had this thing, for a while. I had this thing where I'm like, okay, guess what, guys? I have made an entire Commander deck out of classic art. So it's 100 cards. I have taken, I made this years ago, and as an experiment in Magic the Gathering. And I'm like, okay, look, I printed my own cards. They're worth like pennies. So now you can play all the cards you want. And not only that, the cards even look cooler than the old Magic cards. Like the old Magic cards have like fantasy art in there. I'm using like Mucha and Goya paintings and paintings from like really disturbing Gothic art that looks really, really cool. And with high resolution images, and then the decks look cooler than the ones that you purchase. The same card you purchased for $20 now looks cooler in proxy. But Magic the Gathering can't function on proxies, because if Magic the Gathering functions on proxies, then the physical collection you have is no longer attached to your collection. It's no longer attached to your possessions. And because of that, the whole Timmy aspect goes right out the door. You can no longer experience the game as something that you possess, as something that's part of your identity, even when you're not playing it. And in many ways, I've always felt that the Timmy aspect of Magic the Gathering, it's hard to say because Magic the Gathering functions on having these three elements in it. And as soon as you move away one, you kind of destroy the entire game. But it's very obvious from Wizards of the Coast that because Timmy is the person who buys the cards and who makes the cards have high prices, the game is really organized to please him and not the players who want to play it like an actual competitive sport or who want to mess around with it like it's an interesting intellectual problem, like the Johnnies out there. I always felt that the Johnnies held the game together and was actually made it good. That being said, I'll return to the Boogie 298 question and ask, like, is there a place for Magic the Gathering? Like, is there a place for this? Johan Kurtz, I am in love with his article about sports because he asked the essential question. What is the purpose? What is the teleology of professional sports? What is the teleology of sports themselves? What is the teleology of being a spectator? What's the teleology of being a participant? He asked that question, and from that question, he can answer. And this is why understanding the meta of these objects is so essential. And I find it very, very vexing when it comes to Magic the Gathering because I enjoy the game, but I have to admit at some level that the meta is fundamentally poisonous. And it's poisonous because it can't come, it's based on, and the reason why Magic the Gathering, and I'll still play it as a vice, but it will forever be a vice, I think. And the reason why is because this fundamental contradiction that we're looking at right here. Magic the Gathering is here to convince Timmy that he's a Spike, and to convince Spike that he's a Johnny, and to convince Johnny that he's both Spike and Timmy, and then to charge them for that misunderstanding, right? It's here to convince people that their collections that they paid money for make them a better player in the skill capacity, or that like the skill capacity is going to net them some amount of financial wealth. And in some sense, I feel kind of bad participating in this lie because it really is the process by which, certain people finance a game on top of its back. And really, it should just be honest about what it is. There's a game that was discontinued that I always felt fixed this problem called Android Netrunner. And Android Netrunner said basically, okay, we're just going to cut the Timmies right off. This is just going to be a game that is about competition under conditions of randomity. This is literally going to be poker meets chess, the game, with a constructive deck building meta, but we're going to remove the collectible aspect altogether. And what happened? Well, the game was eventually discontinued because it threatened the profit lines of games like Magic the Gathering, right? Of which the whole point is to transfer money from people like Boogie 29988 and make that serve a larger community of people who want to play this game as competitive poker players. So it's almost like being a poker player where people are paying your own ante so they can play Dungeons and Dragons. It's not the healthiest meta, but damn do I love it, being the person whose antes are being paid by other people sometimes. So anyway, it's I had to go through this meta. It's fun to here's another video game meta that I participated in and I kind of love. StarCraft. Interesting because StarCraft spawned Destiny, the person who ruined the meta of the online social media space. StarCraft 1 was a great meta. It was a game that came out in 1998. It was the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest real-time strategy game that's ever been produced. It had an entire country of South Korea enthralled by this game. It's a very simple real-time strategy game with armies, with tanks. It was really going to be a game based on Warhammer, and it became the ultimate computer spike game. The ultimate test of wills and luck and skill on a computer. And later it had a sequel called StarCraft 2, and they did a great job in designing the game and in designing the graphics and making sure that the game was perfect, but they missed out on a few elements that ruined the meta. The element they ruined in StarCraft 2 was that the units moved too perfectly. The units moved too perfectly, so that the actual army was something that was exploitable as something that you could do things like you could tell all your Marines to move across the board and then stop and fire back, and then they would perfectly move, and then in an instant they would stop and fire, so they could stutter step. And this meant that you could do all sorts of things. The games in StarCraft 2 became gigantic movements of balls of troops across the map. And the problem is that it ruined the meta, because in the original StarCraft, management of multiple units was very, very difficult. And so you had to marshal your attention either to micromanage your troops where they're tactically being engaging, or to macromanage, I should say, your resource management, so you could build more and get a logistic advantage on the map itself. That was the core meta. It was that it well simulated the tactical and strategic trade-offs. And in StarCraft 2, it always felt like the tactical and strategic trade-offs were largely not in play so much. And it was a much weaker meta because of that. I'm kind of running out of time here, and I want to do super chats, so I'm going to have to go on. Here's another game, Warhammer. I had mentioned this one previously. I should probably ask if StarCraft is a healthy meta. I should say, as far as video games go, it's probably one of the healthier metas, in that it is basically computerized real-time chess with a random component to it. You could argue it's had a very negative effect on South Korea, but I think their problems lie elsewhere. What's the meta of Warhammer? Well, the meta of Warhammer, and I discussed this with Sargon, the meta of Warhammer is this is a game, I mean, it's broadly all tabletop wargaming. This is a game developed by H.G. Wells, although his version was Napoleonic. Now it's all like sci-fi and stuff, right? But the idea is, on Warhammer, is to simulate the motions that go into battle. Warhammer is almost entirely a Timmy game. There are some people who do Johnny stuff with Warhammer and who do Spike stuff with Warhammer, where they're either trying to tweak the game or they're trying to win at all costs. Those people have almost no lives, because the amount of financial investment to create one army, let alone multiple armies, and to play enough games in order to tactically game this thing is astronomical to most normal people. Most people who play this game have an army and they play it once or twice a year. You know, maybe you play it a few times, once a month, maybe, if it's really your thing. And the idea of it, the meta of the game, if I were to structure it like what is the teleology of Warhammer? Well, it's to simulate what it kind of feels like to be a commander in a critical moment in a battle. And for this reason, the painting of the little miniatures is actually a critical component of the game, because the painting of the miniatures yourself makes you invested in the little guys that you're moving around the field. So when somebody machine guns down like 3 of your guys, you feel like you've been personally injured, because you remember, painting up those guys and putting them in your army and looking them in formation on your table and thinking how awesome they are. And now the units that you put investment to have just been destroyed by, and that summons you this like emotion of passion. Not passion, but it simulates sort of a similar emotion that you might have in an actual battle. And it's not a mistake that Warhammer and other tabletop games are very, 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 very popular among combat veterans. They're very popular among ex-military communities because I think it's that similar kind of idea of being fundamentally invested in a battle and watching it play out in slow motion, where you have the characters and you have to decide whether you're going to sacrifice this unit or whether you're going to hold them back. And it's that emotion that it's trying to conjure. But the illusion and the investment in the individual objects are essential. And it's really the emotional aspect more than the tactical aspect that is critical in all of this stuff. And it's the simulation of that emotion that is ultimately what is the meta of Warhammer. And okay, could we argue, is this a healthy thing? You know, in the Johann Kurtz way, is this something that we should be encouraging in ourselves or discouraging? I'm not exactly so sure. I mean, it's certainly something that cools your brain down a lot. It takes you out of constantly worrying about things in a way that video games just don't. Because video games are constantly in the digital world, and Warhammer can't, in my mind, be rightfully played in the digital world. It ruins it. It has to be physical. And because of that, is it healthy? I don't know. It does seem to, in some sense, and in some games I've played, connect men with a past version of masculinity. The amount of times where you kind of lapse into talking about politics and war in a more realistic setting, and what that would entail, that's been like both or three. I'm talking about someone who's played this game 3 times. That's been my experience, that this is really an icebreaker to a larger discussion of war itself. And that was always, people who know the history of this game, or really these type of games, will know that this was what the mythology of tabletop wargaming was. H.G. Wells had a friend who was crippled in World War I, a veteran, and he wanted something to do to kind of make his brain to process things. And H.G. Wells came up with this game, watching a younger child play with toy soldiers. He said, well, what if we had a chess-like game that perfectly simulated what battle was in the Napoleonic era? And he came up with this this tabletop simulation of Napoleonic Wars. And that was the original war game, of which these more popular sci-fi variants are a version. And you look at Warhammer literature, it's to largely simulate this sci-fi version of the thing itself. This is kind of a rambly thing. And I don't know. I'm going to go on to the games. And I need to end this because we're way over time here. This kind of gets me to thinking fundamentally, what are the meta orientations of social media networks? And because we play them kind of like we play video games, and this is how we interact with our media right now, and it molds our behaviors to this. And it's kind of funny. I mean, I was talking to a relative when I was back home, and a lot of my female relatives in particular, the younger ones who are my age, cousins and stuff, they're very progressive. And I was telling how I was really enjoying reading Substack. I said, it's like reading a newspaper. It's like what the Atlantic used to be. These are older relatives. And they said, well, your cousins really like TikTok. And they're like, do you like TikTok? And I'm like, because TikTok and Substack, I think they became really popular around about the same time. And I said, well, you'd have to pay me to use TikTok. It's not even that TikTok doesn't have the people who I want to hear from on it. It's that the way you're encouraged to communicate on TikTok is fundamentally antithetical to everything that I want to communicate. I don't want to communicate the way that TikTok communicates. The meta of TikTok is all screwed up. TikTok is about performance. TikTok is about affirmation. But I want dialectic. I want contemplation. I want... Well, sometimes if I'm in a mood that desires catharsis, I want some kind of cathartic experience of conflict. Social medias have been defined by their metas from the beginning. I think it's kind of interesting when I think about it, right? The first social medias that really came on the scene, like TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I mean, Instagram really is just Facebook 2.0. It's like the purified version of Facebook. Well, I'm really thinking of when we first saw Facebook and MySpace, they're what I call affirmation metas. The teleology of Facebook was to celebrate yourself and to show everyone how awesome things were for you. And to make everyone go, oh wow, look at so-and-so. I wish I was living their life. Or I feel so happy for them doing this. And look at me. they're self-advertisements of your ego, and what people went on to these social media sites so that they could affirm each other, so that they could kind of get these warm feelings. And that's why iHypocrite cited Upworthy as being the era of social media that created Boogie 2988. And it's actually almost very, very hard to imagine Boogie 2988 being a character that existed outside of sort of an affirmation meta of Facebook. I would argue that this Facebook died because affirmation metas, was it Morgoth who pointed this out? Facebook died because it was an impure version of social media. It was like an early iteration of heroin when they were originally coming out with opiates. All of these pharmaceutical companies developed versions of morphine for recreational use, or not recreational use. They were developing better and better versions of morphines that they were using in wars. And the early ones, like Soldier's Joy, these were really, really bad. I don't know what the actual chemical was, but these are really, really bad opiates. They're a little bit better than alcohol, like for easing pain. And these things hadn't quite been weaponized yet. And so, Facebook got weaponized into things like Instagram and TikTok, the two spin-offs that allowed you to do it better and faster. And now only people who use Facebook are boomers. LinkedIn, it presents itself as being a professional network, but it is absolutely an affirmation meta. All you see on LinkedIn, if you read the dialogue, is good for you, you did a good job, good for you. You're such a professional person. You're so awesome. Good for you. There's no information being communicated. You don't learn anything on LinkedIn, and you can't. And there's no competition on LinkedIn either. So eventually, what affirmation metas eventually became is they became either fully distilled affirmation metas. Like I said, TikTok and Instagram are the two best ones. And you could argue that things like OnlyFans are sort of the literal monetization or weaponization of affirmation meta social media. Then eventually Twitter, I think that Twitter was the first one that really took Facebook and brought it in a new direction. And you can always tell when people go in a different direction, because people see Twitter and they go, why would anyone want anything like that, right? Twitter was the first pure clout meta. And clout meta is not like affirmation meta. Is like you post and you expect your friends to tell you how great you are. Clout meta is like you're just trying to yell louder than everyone else. You're just trying to make a bigger ruckus around yourself. You're just trying to be really, really, really loud. Twitter, and obviously Twitter is the ne plus ultra of clout metas. YouTube in 2023 is absolutely a clout meta. I listed Twitter twice here. Mistake on the slides. I would even argue that 4chan is kind of a clout meta too. And clout meta is also, I think that Twitter and YouTube at this stage, they're just yelling loud for the purpose of yelling loud. And so they're kind of purely mindless. They're kind of purely mindless social medias. They don't really have any teleology that's not just, we'll put more clicks back into the social media itself to get a louder and louder and louder voice. They're almost democracy made manifest. They're sort of polluted there. But from this, we also have two other kind of metas, discourse metas. And here I would say there's two kinds. There's the adversarial discourse meta. I would say that's YouTube in 2015 and Twitter to a certain extent as well. Here's where people come to have arguments of will, to have content, like to argue with each other, and people watch to see which ideas are stronger. And there's also discourse metas that are exploratory. And this is, I have an idea, let us figure out, in the same way that you had Bertrand Russell and the Jesuit in the early 20th century have a discourse, figuring out where exactly they disagreed on a certain idea. So I'm like, when I engage with Kryptos or Johann Kurtz, you can pretty much guarantee it that we're less in an adversarial mode and more in an exploratory mode, even if we disagree with each other. And I think here, this is what WordPress and Substack and blogs were for. And I think really Substack has cornered that market. And thinking about things this way and breaking social media down this way kind of lets me see what's good and bad, I should say. There's a reason why this is what you're seeing here is sort of a very half-baked rendition of my own understanding of these phenomenon, because I'm trying to figure out what really went wrong with social media. As far as I'm concerned, and for my own purposes, affirmation metas just have to die 1,000 deaths. They're pathological. They're pornographic to the female imagination in particular. Affirmation metas are, women will just get sucked into that black mirror and never get out. Clout metas, I guess, have their use. I mean, they're essentially how our political system works at this stage. Is just whoever can yell loudest on social media will get money and will win power. So as long as somebody else is shouting on clout metas, I can't stop myself from also trying to use clout metas, which is the reason why I have a Twitter account. It's the reason why I am primarily broadcasting on YouTube and not on Odyssey. Because I can't waste my time on 2 social media platforms, and this is the one that has the most clout. I'm not going to lie about that, right? And also it's a better, it's more developed. It's not like it is. It's more developed technology. It works better too. I'm not going to lie, right? Ultimately, the only use for social media that I can see is discourse. The only reason to use social media is either to have an exploratory discourse or an adversarial discourse. I should say networking too, right? I mean, but like, how many networking social medias do you actually have? I mean, you have dating. I should have included a 5th category, right? There's networking social medias, right? Networking social medias are meetup.com and then like OkCupid in the dating apps, and that's it. And the thing is that the problem with networking social media and the networking metas, right, is that networking metas are fundamentally antithetical to the purpose of social media itself. The purpose of social media is to keep you using the social media. And the issue with networking metas is that if they're successful, they'll cause people to stop using the social media itself. So at the point where you have the function of any properly oriented networking meta is to abolish itself at some point for the users who use it. The point of a dating site is to self-abolish itself. The point of a meetup app is to essentially self-abolish itself, because there are more efficient ways to make people aware of an existing group, and simply getting people to network in an area is something that is not useful unless you have a broader goal. And because of that, the networking has always been kind of transitory. And what we're trying to do with basket weaving is to say, okay, look, we are essentially a meta of discourse, exploratory discourse mainly, and sometimes adversarial discourse for either purposes of exploration or purposes of pure catharsis. We are going to create a networking meta so that we can facilitate the creation of a broader community that we need for the higher end of human flourishing. And for that end, it exists. I think that the affirmation and clout metas need to essentially be recognized as such and somehow destroyed, because they're absolutely destroying our societies. And this is something that, there was this question on social media just the other day, and this comes up frequently, where people are like, progressive, this is one difference, and there's always this, oh, we're so much better than them. They're pieces of shit. And you'll hear this, progressives will say this about anti-progressives, and anti-progressives will say this about progressives. But one thing is very, very, very true. And that is that all progressive outlets will publish, this is how this is how you win the arguments at Thanksgiving dinner. Be prepared for these arguments from your conservative relatives at this Thanksgiving dinner, blah, blah, blah. Be prepared for Christian nationalist arguments this Thanksgiving, and so on and so forth. The problem, and conservatives, by contrast, will say, oh, just don't bring up politics on Thanksgiving. There is no conversation you can have that's worth a Thanksgiving dinner, and because the bond of the family is more important. And you can make all sorts of sort of solo monarch arguments about how this proves that conservatives are better than progressives, or so on and so forth. But what it really shows is that the organic human meta is something that really is more valuable for the conservative political process or the anti-progressive political process than is the social media meta. The social media meta is everything that progressives wanted. And for that reason, lockdown was sort of the apex progress. Like, they could never perform better. Progressives could really never be more progressive. They could never do the progressive political project better than when human meta interaction was entirely confined to normies being locked in their houses during COVID while activists roam the streets smashing shit. Like, nothing could be better than that, because it's the perfect meta for them. It's the perfect. You're either an activist Antifa, smashing shit and burning shit down, and crying out all cops are bastards, or you're locked in your house and you're in a giant affirmation bubble, or you're in a giant clout bubble, and those are the only two options for the rest of your life. If progressives could replicate that eternally, they would, because that is the perfect way for their ideas to spread. And the organic and human is really an obstacle at that stage. And I don't want to be like, oh, those people are pieces of shit, but I'll say this: the point of progressive politics is to ruin Thanksgiving. If they ruin Thanksgiving, their political project is moved forward, because Thanksgiving dinner advances reactionary and progressive ideas just by existing. Just by existing, it creates a meta that is implicitly reactionary. It creates a meta that is implicitly tradition. That is the thing itself. And so, and it's a meta that progressive ideas cannot thrive in. It's the teleology of Thanksgiving is anti-progressive in its inception. So it's not that like they want to disrupt Thanksgiving. They almost need to disrupt Thanksgiving for their project to advance further. Because everything else, all the spiritual energy of Thanksgiving, is in the exact opposite direction. I guess this brings me to the end of my talk, and it's not going to be as cathartic as last time's, but this is a little bit of a lower key stream. They have to be low points as well as high points. And I don't usually enter chat at this stage, but someone's saying you should shill basket weaving with the networking social media. But can we? This is the thing. People will understand one critical element about basket weaving is that it is invite only. Okay, I might have missed your DM to me when you DM me about basket weaving. You could have caught me on an off day. It could have gone to my spam folder. Please email me again. Please DM me on Twitter again. I'll try to get back to you. This is not my day job. I'm at work, 50 hours a week typically. Like this is, or sometimes even more than that, right? But basket weaving is invite only because we can't use social media. The way we can't just toss these invitations to the wind, because weird people are going to start showing up. There has to be effort to come to these things of a minimal variety, so that a certain minimal amount of vetting can occur to create a meta on the ground that we can actually use. The meta interaction that's going on in something like our mini event in New Jersey is critical to the thriving of political organizations in the dissent sphere going forward. Being able to walk into an environment of mature adults, have cocktails, and talk about classic music, talk about education, talk about the various ways of interpreting Hegel, and maybe insert a Warhammer reference in on the side, but not to the extent that it would irritate any of your wives. Right? Yeah, that's a Warhammer in moderation. And you always know Warhammer in moderation because women get irritated when men talk about Warhammer too much. and Warhammer such that you're not feeling like a complete dipshit when you're holding a glass of champagne in one hand and are wearing a suit with a tie. at a bar in an inn. Okay, like, okay, once you're in that, you realize that there's only so long you can go on about about Horus Lupercal and the Horus heresy and the Drop Pod massacre or something like that, right? Then you transition back to Chopin and Spengler, right? But the thing is that the meta is self-correcting. Once those people are in the room, once they're wearing the clothes that they're wearing, once they're talking in the ways that they're talking, there's an implicit teleology to the organization that organically communicates what is good and what is bad, and that moves you towards a common purpose, that moves you towards the imperative, and the feeling of what's going to come next. Now, no organization is ever stronger than the people that sacrifice for it. I'm going to say that again. No organization is ever stronger than the people that sacrifice for it. But the metas you engage in, the meta game of the basket weaving meetup, does so much to bring out those more mature elements. I'm never going to be 24 years old again. I am never going to be the person that stays up till midnight talking. I can't. I've got Sunday school the next day. I've got work the next day. My kid wakes up at 6 a.m. even if I want to sleep until 8 a.m. Right? I have to make breakfast. I can't stay up till midnight and plan to take over the world anymore. But I'll do everything in my power to facilitate those conversations happening. And that I'm dedicated to that because that's what's called for me in those social circumstances. And that's what everyone feels. And people step forward and become the better versions of themselves when they're put inside that meta environment. Just like you start thinking better when you play chess. Just like you try to become a better bluffer when you play poker. Just like you start thinking like a warrior or you think abstractly like a warrior when you play Warhammer 40k, and you think viscerally like a warrior when you play tackle football, right? And both invoke a certain element of war from a different perspective that you can relive and use to reconnect to masculine virtue. Just like you think intuitively when you play Magic the Gathering about how to constructively manipulate an environment in the coolest possible way. All of these metas, they're never more than the spirit of the people who come to them, but they guide you and they mold you in certain ways. If you take an affirmation meta, one that encourages victimhood, one that encourages identifying with your own consumer products, then they can devour you like Boogie 2988. But if you find the right metas, the ones where you come in and you instantly want to be a teacher and a mentor for this community, you instantly want to give more, and you instantly want to have more interactions like this in real life, then you can make the metas of the organization, the meta culture of the organizations work for you. And I think that's a way to create new subcultures. So with that being said, I'm way over time. I'm going to go to Super Chats. Listen to this commercial from our sponsors.
Hark, gentle listener. Are the woes of the modern world getting you down? Isolation, atomization, alienation. Oh no! But a new approach to the internet and social connections is coming to the fore. A place to meet quality people undaunted by the challenges of modernity. A space for new and better conversations, unfettered by the bounds of wokeness. For those men of quality, gumption, with a can-do spirit. Introducing basket weaving. Basket weaving, a new craze, sweeping the nation, bringing quality people together. Basket weaving is not an organization or a club, but a practice. Basket weaving takes social media connections and makes them real, forging the trust so long frayed by our decadent clown world. How do you start? Simply join one of our inlet servers. Look for the channel that corresponds to your locality and begin interacting with people who want to work together locally. Regular meetups are occurring now all across America and many non-American countries. So fight the modern poison with your fellow listeners to build new organizations, new friendships, and eventually a brighter future.
right, guys. I'm not doing an extended. I'm not doing an extended intermission because I just have to get through these things because it's really late and I have to work tomorrow. Okay, but I'm just gonna head right into super chats. A little bit more of a low key one than last time. I know people. Look, I get it, guys. People really like streams where I'm angry, but I can only complain about Jordan Peterson and progressives for so long. So, I mean, if you want me to complain about Twitter, I'll get really angry and complain about Twitter. This is what I really miss about the old YouTube, is that the old YouTube had adversarial discourse. I am starved for adversary. Who am I? I mean, this is the problem with manifestos. The problem with manifestos is there's no person that they can go to that's very good. Like there's no ideal reader of a manifesto the way there is an ideal reader of something like a manual for princes, or a philosophical treatise, or even a video like this. The problem is I have a very difficult time sharpening my axe, as my wife says. I have a really hard time sharpening my own intellectual understanding of the situation when I'm not talking to the people that are my political rivals. Everyone at this stage is either a co-belligerent, an ally, or an enemy that I never talk to. And that's the closest thing that I have to a co-belligerent that talks to me, or like the Christian nationalist guy, or the anti-Christian nationalist guys, like the Big Eva guys. Like that's the front. At any rate, though, let's keep on going here. Kate McNamara for $3 USA. Was a pleasure meeting you and fellow Weavers on Saturday. Well, thank you very much. I think I do remember meeting you at the end, but please attend other basket weaving events in the areas. I will, a little bit of a warning, guys, not all basket weaving groups are as strong as others. Some basket weaving groups, I'm thinking currently it seems New England and Virginia are really strong. And the ones that we have in New Jersey are a little bit weaker. So be aware of that. We had to build what we want to do. Another thing I forgot to mention, too, about this speech, I've learned a lot of lessons doing this. And this is sort of the point of my speech, is initially when I was doing basket weaving, I'm like, oh, well, I do Magic the Gathering every now and again. Why don't I have like a basket weaving Magic the Gathering event? This does not work. And the reason it does not work is that it's against the teleology of weaving. Teleology is supposed to be getting you to do things that are aspirational, that are things that you should be doing. They're not supposed to be indulging or in vices with people who happen to share your ideological point of view. Hey, if you want to come in like once a month and like every now and again when I get a chance to go out and actually play a game, I'm happy to invite you. But like that's against the teleological purpose of basket weaving. And so it's sort of antithetical to the purpose of basket weaving is to be aspirational and to always grasp for that which is higher. And if you're doing it for nerd hobbies, I'm not saying it couldn't work. I'm not saying that if you're at a get-together and someone busts out a game of Android Netrunner, I wouldn't play. As a matter of fact, when I was at the airport and our flights were delayed for 3 hours, my friend Last Things literally busted out Android Netrunner and we played a game. And I lost because it had been years since I had played. But that's saying that you couldn't be part of this balanced breakfast, so to speak. But the core of any outing for basket weaving has to be this: we're doing this to make ourselves better people and to be more mature people. And if it's not directed at that at its inception, then the event is probably not the best idea. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. I meant to hand you this a while ago, but here it is. A lifetime N-word pass with unlimited uses. Asteroidal Assassin, I thought you were Arabic. I have no use for an N-word pass, but thank you very much. Maybe I can say Niger in some creative ways. Right. What's the closest I've ever had to needing an N-word pass? Well, I don't know, but thank you very much. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. I should let you know that alcohol is considered forbidden in Christianity too. Really? That's unusual because I seem to remember Jesus literally commanding the consumption of wine as part of his. I mean, we believe it's the blood of Christ, obviously through transubstantiation. But wine is literally part of Christian religious ceremony as an ingredient at the altar, and was throughout Jewish history and celebration. So alcohol cannot be illicit in a strong sense. Certainly drunkenness is. And I would advise, I mean, look, at the event, I had one, what did I have? I had a pumpkin ale, because I'm white, I'm sorry. It's November. And if I'm a white American and the season goes by and I haven't had pumpkin flavored something, then I have failed my existence as a blue state white American. I'm sorry. That's my culture, dude. Deal with it. But anyway, yeah, I had a pumpkin ale and I had a glass of champagne, and that was like, that basically doubled the number of alcoholic servings I typically have. Like, alcohol is usually like a once a week thing for me. And so, yeah, I mean, I think drinking in moderation and only socially is the way to go. Drunkenness is a very, very bad habit, and I definitely don't recommend it. But I can't see how alcohol is forbidden, considering how much it's a part of Christian culture. Not to mention sacramental culture for obvious reasons. German Sasudo for $15 USA. Hello, Dave. First time watching live. I'm 25 and I'm getting married on Saturday. Well, congratulations, man. Please say a prayer for us. Do you have any shorthand marriage advice? Well, I've been married for 5 years now. It's going pretty well. It's going very well. I thought we'd have at least one fight by this point, especially during COVID. I thought we've had like fights, but like when I've raised my voice, but it's like me raising my voice and I immediately apologize. It's that kind of stuff. It's like, it's not like fights. And, my advice for marriage is be 100% aligned on your goals. And, okay, I'll give you 3. Obviously, there's the preliminary, which you should do before you're married. Before you're married, make sure that you're 100% aligned on like the overarching goals, or you're entirely confident that she's going to defer to you. You want 0 political conflicts that are not kind of cute political conflicts. I know that there's that really, cute Norman Rockwell painting where like the husband's arguing with his wife and they're pointing at candidates at the paper and the kid's crying underneath them. And the husband's like, he looks like the prudentialist. He's like this like thin traditionalist guy. And the wife just has like this utter like, she has this utter mid-blonde pout going on that's very, very cute, But it's a very cute Norman Rockwell painting. But aside from cute things about whether you want to vote for Dewey or Truman in the election, where there's like no ideological significance, you want to have 0 like big political disagreements in the family. You want to have, she cares, you don't, you care, she doesn't, or you're aligned on things that have that political religious valence, or she's willing to accept your direction. And if you don't, if you're unequally yoked in some way, you have to be very, very aware of that. The second advice I have for marriage is make sure that you have an understanding of whose job is what. So the best thing for chore division is that you have a job and it's 100% your job. And then she has her jobs and it's 100% her job. And you need to learn her job so that you can pinch hit for her. So I need to learn how the laundry works, because when she's gone for a weekend, I need to be able to do it. But ordinarily, it's just her thing. Taking out the trash, before we had the whole, we already lived in an apartment. That was her thing. That was my thing, pardon me. You want to be as much in your own sphere as possible. But this comes into the third thing where there's an exception to this. You want to be co-owners of everything, right? So the more you can come to the understanding that your wife's time is your time and your time is your wife's time, the more you will help out with that, right? the more you'll be able to make marital harmony happen. So I have listed this example, and I realized this in myself. So for instance, he said like, well, as a single guy, you let dishes stack up in the sink. And so as a married guy, you learn that you want to wash dishes and put them in the dishwasher, right? Because you're not a barbarian, right? And well, then a hypocrite said one of his learning moments was, well, the dishwasher is full. So, okay, I wash it and I put it in the sink, awaiting transfer to a dishwasher that's full because I can't put it in a clean dishwasher, right? Okay, but you're thinking like you're thinking like you are like an office, like this is the office dishwasher. This is like office rules for dishwashers, right? The dishwasher is full of clean things. You don't put it in the office dishwasher, in the common room, right? But the thing is, a hypocrite said, he's like, well, then I realized, well, why don't I just unload the dishwasher? It takes 5 minutes and it saves her 5 minutes. Saves her way more time to not have the dishes in the dishwasher. And so you want to become a co-owner of the household chores. The fourth thing is like the buck stops with you, right? I assume you're the man. German, depending on the pronunciation, you could be a woman, right? But the buck stops with you, which means that all financial problems are ultimately your responsibility. And you don't want to put it like, you don't want to be like, why did you spend that money on this? Like, I've done that a few times in moments of weakness, or I've implied it. That's been a major failing of mine. You want to be like, honey, like for the future, we need to make sure that you have a budget of this for this thing. Like, you always want to be constructive, and you always want to be the ultimate owner of everything. And if she has something that she's made a mistake on, like, you want to manage that. You don't want to punish it. Like learn from management techniques. Just assume responsibility, and then insert yourself as the person that has the solution for the problem, and frame the issue as if it's a learning experience before or even get irritated about it, right? And this oftentimes comes up with money, because sometimes women don't understand how much they're spending, which is this is a frequent problem. Like, it doesn't add up in their mind, right? Especially with inflation, because they're like, oh, my husband makes a good amount of money, therefore we are middle class. When my parents were middle class, we could afford this, so of course I can buy this. But they don't, like, that's not part of the budget, right? That doesn't add up, right? So because of inflation, you can't afford that, and that's not something that registers, and you have to own that. So and a large part of and women are right. Well, I'm really going off on this. Men complain that women want, and this definitely depends on how much you've married, like a tomboy versus like a very femme girl. And she's very feminine, but she's also kind of a tomboy. But women are right to want men to read their minds, because a large part of your job as a man is to figure out what your wife's blind spots are, and then to make sure that she's not making a mistake in that dimension, right? You want to defer decisions to her, but when you do that, you're trying to make sure, like, you're the person who handles the exception, right? She handles the rules and the enforcement of the rules. You handle when there's something that occurs where an exception needs to be made. Right? You are the exception handler of the marriage, and because of that, you need to understand what your wife's blind spots are and anticipate her making those mistakes. You're like the goalie of the team, kind of. But thank you. So ownership, proper division of tasks so that it's understood, complete alignment, and then understanding that ownership means that you have to try to understand your wife psychologically. Son of Hastor for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. It was great to see you again this weekend. Well, thank you very much. Great talk. I'm hoping we can get another event like this together a little further north. Yeah, I hear there's a Christmas event in the DC area, which is a stronger organizational area. And then there's also a stronger thing going on further north in like New England. I've wanted to do an upstate New York event, because I think my friend Fritz Imperial lives upstate, and I've always wanted to meet him. But these are like long drive times, and I can't. I would have to bring my wife and kid, and that would involve a hotel, and these are very large logistic asks for me with a family in tow. So we would need to work that out. But I would love to come up and give another speech. If you like the one I gave, I can just whip these up in the time it takes to make one of these things, right? It's actually harder to make them shorter, as I've learned, right? To cut it down into something that actually has a thesis statement. But thank you very much, Son of Pastor. Their problem, too, is that I know the faces and the handshakes of all the people I've met, but I have no ability to match these online interactions with the people I met there. So I'm guessing that I know who you are, but I can't necessarily know for sure. And I'm way over Dunbar's number with the number of people I know online. Son of Pastor for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. It was great to see you again this week. Oh, no, wait. That's not right. Zany Zoomer for $5. Can Boogie 2988 be used as an example to young men on how not to live their lives? I am profoundly disturbed by what I've heard about the documentary he was in. Well, yeah, the problem with the millennial generation is that the way they present themselves superficially is it always makes it seem like they're just about to make things better. And because of that, it's very, very hard to treat Boogie 2988 as a constructive, as a cautionary tale without throwing people under the bus who genuinely need a wake-up call. There are a lot of people who are in Boogie 2988 situation, and what they need more than anything else is not someone to tell them that they're a piece of shit, but to give them a 5-point plan about how to get them out of their funk. The first part, if I were Boogie 2988 and I didn't know that he was, I'm pretty convinced that he's trying to self-sabotage himself. The first thing you need is something to get you out of the house that's not fast food or like a drug, like Magic the Gathering, essentially. You need friends that do things together that are aspirational and that are not just sort of like doing the same sort of self-indulgent shit. And you need a plan, and you need to actually commit to a plan you need someone to come in and help you manage. You need one of these friends to come and make commitments and promises that you keep. Like, how about I'll just never eat a fast food again? Like, you don't need to eat a fast food, ever. You never need to eat a fast food. And if you're having weight problems, just cut soda. That's so easy. It's so like, no one ever needs to drink soda. And so it's the easiest first step of the diet is just, I'll never drink soda. And just do it for like 6 months. And I've given up soda for 6 months and lost some weight. And right now I'm not giving up soda. Like, I'll have like a cherry soda. And what I do is I pour a little of it into a glass and I have like a shot glass full of it, right? And then like I put it in the refrigerator and then I have a little bit of it the next day and a little bit the next day. And that's the proper way to drink soda. And soda is fine. The problem is that the amount of soda you should be drinking is like literally like a whiskey glass. You should be having like a whiskey glass of soda. That's the amount. And anything larger than that is like egregious. But it's like those tiny commitments need to be put into place. So the problem with cautionary tales for millennials is that they design themselves so that they're very difficult to use as cautionary tales. Asteroid Assassin for $3. You criticize anime a lot. I have my anime issues with it, despite watching anime sometimes. But why do you dislike anime and manga so much? Yeah, I have an essay about this called Anime Won't Save the Boomers. And that is because anime is the ultimate style over substance, right? It's the ultimate communication that so there's this expression called fake. There's the expression that doomed the millennial generation is fake it until you make it. And the problem is sometimes you're faking it until you make it. Sometimes you're just faking it. And anime encourages you to always fake it. And at some point you realize in anime, and everyone who gets out of anime has this point of realization, that 90% of anime culture are people who are just, the lives that are depicted in anime are so far away from the lives of the fans that consume anime that you almost have to, at the end of the day, believe that the simulacra is more real than the actual thing. Case in point, I mean, I use this example in my article. In high school, there were a bunch of people who liked anime. And in anime, we watched all these animes about like Victorian societies with these ballroom gowns and this highly traditional aesthetic. And all love affairs were eventually consummated in marriage. And it was so trad in its aesthetics. And then my friends, because I did everything in high school. Like I was on the tennis team, so I had a few jock friends. I was in that, I had anime friends. I just went into all groups. So it was kind of a go-between in a lot of places. And my more jockey friends, like listened to hip hop music like Eminem. They were into like degenerate shit, like drinking. And they couldn't give a shit about this anime stuff. All my jock friends are married. And the anime friends, I mean, they all got involved in this LGBTQ stuff. A lot of them like got into the trans scene. And it's because it's style over substance. It's a simulacrum. And, if you're going to fake it until you make it, if you are watching Victorian anime because you want to actually idolize the virtues of that era, then you owe it to yourself to actually take steps to embody those things in your own life and your real world commitments. And when you start going down that path, I feel personally that suddenly anime stopped feeling as good. I could see the fakeness in it a lot more. When the harem animes were funny and cute, and I knew that the main characters were kind of pathetic. When you see these like harem anime, these harem anime main characters, these dorky guys, and they have 4 beautiful women like just, throwing themselves at them, and then like, oh, that's cute. I know he doesn't deserve it. I'm way more competent than he. Like I have a plan for my life, but I'm still into this thing. I know it's an illusion. But then you go into the real world, you put more effort in, and you return to it, and you're like, wow, I'm kind of disgusted by this situation. What are these girls doing pursuing this loser? And furthermore, you just know that this is sort of the pornographic thing that's going through men's minds while they surround themselves with the digital harem of online pornography. Online coon brain culture is harem culture. It's little things like that. And I'm very suspicious in this day and age of things that look like the genuine article, but never actually cause the genuine article to be instantiated in the real world. Dreadnought for $10 USA. Anons and Man Up. The big problem they are going to have is that trad isn't about a better deal for men. Trad demands that men give and sacrifice for no return, risk their lives, etc. The future Anons want can't exist. They can't want marriage that provides equal benefit. Marriage does not work like that. Yeah, I mean, what they want is they want me to deliver trad women to like the 50th percentile man who wants a trad woman, which is like, our society is in stark decline. There are very, very few women that don't have some problem or the other that we're going to have to overcome. And the men, a lot of the men, especially the ones that demand this stuff online and complain about being asked to man up, if it's the average man who was at our event, like that guy could probably get a girl and I will help him get a girl. And they're in a suit, they're giving a speech, they're helping the cause, they're helping build community, they're helping reconstruct society in the way that it should be. Like, we have something to work with there. But if it's like these online anons complaining about like Jordan Peterson's 12 rules of life being too onerous for them, I don't know what to say, man. I mean, what is a woman supposed to say to that? Look, trad women aren't going to get us out of this shit. Brotherhood, fraternity, dedication to brotherhood, and male friendship is going to get out of this. Femininity will follow proper male masculinity, and real male masculinity can only exist in brotherhood, in fraternity with other men. for a greater mission, for a greater aspiration. That is the only way out of this problem. Now, I'm married. I don't have this problem. But women are not going to start acting like women until men act like men collectively in some place. It's not safe for them to do that. And, we're going to have to build this in some way, shape, or form. And if you want to work, I want to see these young men have matches. But what can I say? Like, those matches are going to go to men who are probably 70th percentile and above at this stage of our historical decline. That's the bottleneck. Sam153 for $10. Thanks for the stream, Dave. Always a pleasure. Cheers. Well, thank you very much. Asteroidal Assassin for $5 USA. Let's look at the bright side of the incel situation. As long as there are incels, there are people who want to change. I'm not sure how much change men would strive for with the $40 of prostitutes. With the $40 prostitutes like they do in Sodom. I mean, Los Angeles. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. The $40 an hour prostitutes in Los Angeles. And then you hear that Boogie 2988 spent $200,000 on prostitutes. Look, prostitution at any price is so disgusting. It's absolutely gross. It's physically revolting. And you realize it's like, even if you like go to like, I've been to bachelor parties that have gone to strip clubs, and I've just been disgusted with myself, even at that level. It's just, I still feel gross. It's a really, you know what I find really disgusting about it? It's not even like the sex for money thing. It's the fact that I know that like every behavior from these women is a lie. It's the fakeness that I can't stand. The fakeness. That's why I don't like anime either, right? I can't stand the female form that's lying like that, right? I have to have I have a very, very low tolerance for female bakery, right? And that's one of the reasons why I love my wife so much, is that she's one of the most sincere women I've ever met. And that's one of her many good qualities, I should say. But anyway, yeah. Incels at least want to change, right? But it takes more than just desire to change to actually get through the incel situation. Nerve Van V-Maker for $15 USA. What's your thoughts on video games as art? Certainly great skill goes into making them, and some, I believe, approach true art. Shadow of the Colossus is one. I've never actually played Shadow of the Colossus. I've seen it. I've seen like the pictures of those Colossi, but they have addictive aspect to them, which no art should have. A great book makes art away from the book easier. A great game makes life away from it harder. Yeah, and I've said this very many times before, is that the problem with video games is that their metas are fundamentally not aligned with the artistic meta. The artistic meta is to challenge your audience, and the fundamental quality of the meta in a video game is to kind of make them feel comforted. And those two metas, I guess you could reconcile them by doing kind of a bait and switch. And BioShock Infinite tried to do this. Both the BioShock titles tried to do this. It's going to try to bait and switch with the video game. I like my pleasure mixed with pain, so the Red Hot Chili Peppers type deal. Rock music has elements like the Smashing Pumpkins is very catchy pop music, but there's some elements that are evocative of art too, right? So the sugar with salt thing, it's a very challenging medium to make art. Although you've kind of caught on to the reason why it is very difficult to make art out of video games. Is chess an art? I think StarCraft could be art, like chess, the game is art. It's a similar concept, just in real time, right? People will be continuously... I'm convinced that humans will be playing StarCraft forever. Or for as long as, there are Turing machines to play it on. It's one of those eternal classics in terms of video games. Really hard game. I was never very good at StarCraft. I had some cheese moves that I pulled that would allow me to win a game eventually with Zerg, but never very good at that game. and but I appreciate it for what it was. In order to make video games art, they have to stop being modern video games. They have to be something more along the lines of sort of immersive storytelling, or they have to follow along the lines of like pure games like chess or something like that. That's the best I can do with at this level of this at this stage of the stream. But thank you very much, Nerve and VMaker. Darth Kilhoun for $3 USA. Great work you do, Dave. Cannot watch right now, but we'll rewatch tomorrow when I'm in the car for 12 hours. Well, I hope this entertains you. This was a little bit more of a rambly one than last week's, but maybe I'll focus on doing something that's more anger-inducing. I've noticed a pattern about all of my streams. People like Sam Bankman-Fried one. They like debate review ones. They like the ones about, the last one about the fake cringe and gay stuff with the Chaos Gods. They like the ones where I'm angry. The ones where I ramble are a little less so. I think those make better essays because they're more polished. Grace Mogg for $3. I just found out there's an R Christian natalism today. I'm wondering if there's anyone there who believes in the divinity of Christ or even God. Christian antinatalism. Antinatalism. Yeah, I don't know. Antinatalism is fundamentally antithetical to Christianity, and you're a heretic. Antinatalism is just the most disgusting philosophy of all time, and I cannot imagine a way to incorporate that with Christianity or any Abrahamic religion without it becoming the most vile heresy imaginable. So I don't know. I mean, vile heresies... That'd have to be a really that would have to be like a word bearer level twisted heretic to get like a Christian, like an honest Christian antinatalist. What that would have to be a twisted heresy, and there are quite a few twisted heresies out there in the world today. Grace Mogg for $3 USA. If we ever met aliens, do you think they would try to convert them to Christ? Would it even be possible? Or would there just be too much difference? Well, I'm of the opinion that we would have a very difficult time communicating with space aliens outside of war and very basic needs. So our ability to convert them to Christianity would be incredibly limited. And so I would assume that we wouldn't be able to convert them based on my understanding. Sort of more of a Wittgensteinian. I think that's a Wittgenstein once said, if a lion could talk, we would not be able to understand it. Well, if aliens could talk, we could not understand it. It would be like that Star Trek episode, Shaka When the Walls Fell. Or, I'm sorry, the Star Trek episode's called Dharmak, right? But Shaka When the Walls Fell is the expression. They have translators hooked up to these aliens, and they cannot understand their language even after the translation, because the language is entirely allegorical. And without contact to their storytelling, they have no ability to communicate with the aliens. I think that this situation would be very similar with aliens, and the idea that they would be able to understand Christ's parables would be very, very limited, which is why that I think that if there is alternative alien life, it would have to have some kind of salvational dispensation that would be separate from the figure of Jesus in his human form. Grace Mogg for $4. Why are snakes considered wise, smart, and malevolent in so many mythologies? Well, I don't honestly know. I mean, that predates Christianity. It might even predate the Torah. The snake being the malevolent entity in these narratives was a long-standing motif throughout. I guess because people get bitten by snakes in the grass, right? So if you're talking about from an evolutionary psychology point of view, that's probably a good guess about why they believe that. But thank you very much. Nerve and VMaker for $5 USA. These man children on YouTube yelling about consumer products were all trying to copy the angry video game nerd. What they never got was that James was actually playing a character and nothing like the guy in camera. He was a well-adjusted father of 3. Yeah, that's the thing too, like the nostalgia critic crowd too. Channel Awesome people. All of these guys, I guess like, I mean, this is the Gen X people were doing it ironically. And then the millennials started doing it and they became the very character that they were making fun of, or they made parody versions of themselves that were very hard to distinguish from their actual real life personalities. This is a very, very tragic thing. I think the Channel Awesome guys, with the exception of Lindsay, what is it? It's not, is that Lindsay Ellis? Is that the one? Is Lindsay Ellis Nostalgia Chick? Is that the one? I want to get the right Lindsay here. Yeah, Nostalgia Chick is Lindsay Ellis. With the exception of Lindsay Ellis, I think all of those guys are doing very, very well. I think they just left the scene after they were done collecting gobs and gobs and money for being the first people to try something. Everyone thought of, a year after they started doing it, hey, wait a minute, we can just point the camera at ourselves and make gobs of money doing this? Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. If you think Boogie is depressing, you should watch those comedy videos black people make about living in their neighborhoods. Yeah, that might be pretty depressing. I think I would have a hard time figuring out what's satire and what's not. There's a pretty big cultural division between, white Americans and African Americans. So it's, it can be very difficult to figure out. I mean, like, it's like hip hop. When you're listening to Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, like, sometimes on their songs, like, there's a level of self-awareness that you're like, this is exactly what I would be thinking in their situation. And other times it's just like something that's so antithetical to your way of intuitively viewing the world that you can't even imagine yourself thinking something like that in a war like scenario. And that's not really, my grandfather fought in World War II. Like, violence is all around us, right? And it's a cultural difference in how we process these things, right? And so that makes it very, very difficult for me to figure out exactly what's parody, what's degeneracy, or what's just a cultural difference between the two groups. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. If you ever get depressed, just remember Matt McManus sounds like the adult Charlie Brown. Oh yeah, I mean, he's kind of playing a character, right? He's playing a character of like the nerd who figures everything out. The depressing thing about McManus is that I'm pretty convinced that the university system bubble is just going to completely collapse. It's not like the university system is going to collapse, like he's going to lose his job at the university. It's going to be like, soon people will see degrees from university and doctorates as being more or less useless and stupid. And this whole idea of oh, look at me, I'm a PhD in politics, therefore I must know something about politics, is going to fall through. And when that happens, the whole rationale for how he set up his life is going to seem a lot more useless. And I feel bad for the guy. I think he should have kids, and that would give his life a lot more meaning. I mean, having kids has given my life a lot more meaning than my job has. I work my job to pay for my kids. Having kids has given my life more meaning than this YouTube channel. Even though I would say that this, my work here feels more meaningful than my wage job. I'll confess to that. Dreadnought for $5 USA. Well, if you're advocating giving up nerdy leisure because of Boogie misusing it, you'd better advocate giving up sex and food as well. Universal celibacy and boredom for all of us. We starve to death. We could do this for almost anything. Yeah, but okay, Dreadnought, I agree with you. But I do recognize, like, there was this great blogger called Anti-Dem. And, he was one of the original alt-right bloggers, so he and I had some big disagreements back in the day over how much race should be emphasized, with me believing that race needed to be de-emphasized in favor of religion, even if we acknowledge certain realities about, potential biological differences and certainly cultural differences, even when we acknowledge those things, I felt that ideologically it should be de-emphasized. So, and we had some disagreements in that regard, but he wrote some really good essays. One of them was about homosexuality in Japanese culture and Brideshead Revisited. And the other one was on this division between, I can't remember what it was called, but it was, I think I even recorded an audiobook version, and certain Millennial Woes did, is he said that, his visions of God are kind of governed by two images of God. One is, he calls Lua, which is based on this Dungeons and Dragons deity, that makes you think that everything is going to be all right. You're fine just the way you are. You're fine just the way you deserve that, right? Like, it's all right. You've worked too hard. Be more forgiving with yourself. And sometimes God does say, you need to forgive yourself, right? But then there's that other voice of God that is more commonly in reactionary circles called Non. Some people represent it as the crab god, but it's basically, Non is a backwards acronym. It's a backwards acronym for nature or nature's God. So NONG or GNON, as it said in Non, nature or nature's God. And Non simply is the voice of God that is the consequences. It always has consequences. You drink that soda, it's going to have consequences. You snack this late at night, it's going to have consequences. You don't exercise, it's going to have consequences. And Non is the God of justice. And every time, and he says this too, and I feel it too, like, the problem with nerd hobbies is that every time I do them, and sometimes I need this, but I hear the voice of Alua saying, you're fine just the way you are. It's all right. It's all going to be okay. And the problem with nerd hobbies is not, that voice probably, you do anything pleasurable. You watch TV, you feel that way. You take a bath, you feel that way. Everyone feels that way in the shower, right? That's the relaxation mode. I mean, we have serotonin for a reason, right? The humans can't be on all the time. But the problem with some of the nerd hobbies, and the reason why I distrust them, even while I enjoy them, is that they always suggest that maybe the point of your life could just be feeling this way all the time. And I would say that Boogie 2988 is an example of somebody who's been completely overtaken by the spirit of Alua. Anyway, thank you very much. Nick Cesaro for $10 USA. We need to interact with nerd culture and anything that is a screen. People like 40K and interact with it like the machine spirit. I'm talking about gargoyles around screens, or making sure the proper rituals have been acted out before doing some needed activity. We need to ward away modernity like demons. This is actually a great idea. The idea that you interact with screens and nerd culture as a point of ceremony is a great idea. This is why, I think Friday Night Magic is sort of the perfect way to experience magic. Like, this is the one day out of the month or week or season where I go and play Magic the Gathering, and that is it. And that is and then my friends come with me and we go hiking the next week or hiking the next day, right? Or, we play hockey or something like that. That's it. If it's properly compartmentalized, that is the reason that is, and it's properly understood. And this is the reason why meta is so important, right? And I didn't really properly communicate this, and I might need to make this into an essay, but the reason why whenever we do something, we have to ask ourselves, what is the teleology of this thing? What is the meta of this thing? What is the nature of the implicit rules of this object that lead us to do certain things or prioritize or teach us about certain things over others? How is it molding us? And if it's something like magic where I enjoy it, it exercises my brain, it's a relaxation thing, but it contains within it a poisonous meta, then I need to be very, very aware that I don't let that meta overtake my better judgment and start colonizing other areas of my life. You know, it has to be compartmentalized. Like alcohol. Alcohol has to be I would say this about, I would say that all alcohol must be ceremonial alcohol. All alcohol must be alcohol used in transubstantiation literally, or it must be alcohol that's offered up in the mode of a celebration. And that even can be a wine every day for dinner. But every time you use alcohol, you have to be saying a prayer. You have to be saying a prayer every time, not some kind of ridiculous wino prayer either. You have to be celebrating something that's outside the alcohol itself. Ben White for $5 USA. Good day, Dave. I feel like I have a good 20 IQ points over most of my coworkers at my new job. I know that sounds arrogant, but it gets frustrating really quickly. How do I prevent my pride from getting the best of me? What do you suggest I do here? Well, just remember that IQ isn't everything, and that, there is this ridiculous notion that like there's different kinds of intelligence, and everyone's intelligent in something, right? That's obviously bullshit. Intelligence and versions of intelligence are highly correlated. That's one of the reasons why IQ, even though it's very, very narrow in what it measures, tends to correlate with everything else because, it's everything's linked up back there. And right, and if you're smarter, you're more likely to be good looking, and you're more likely to be tall, right? These things occur together. There is sort of a qualitative dimension to genetics, and this is I guess fortunate for the species, but there's a reason why women they make the selections that they do, right? And that's fine. That is what it is. But when it comes to how we learn and how humans interact, you learn just as much from stupid people as you learn from smart people. Because you're learning about the human condition, and you're learning about wisdom, and you're learning about the limitations, and you're learning about physics and how the real world works and how bodies move through the real world. If you are around animals, that sounds sort of degrading to people who are less intelligent. But, you would learn a ton around an organic being like an animal, and they have maybe something that we could call approaching a soul, but they don't have human souls the way fully realized in the image of God. And they certainly don't have advanced minds. And now think about that. Now you are in the room with somebody, and the only thing that separates you is 20 IQ points. So what are we talking about? You read more advanced books than them. You are able to engage in arguments and think abstractly about things and rotate objects better and hold more symbols in your brain. But you still have the same experiences with the world. And when you engage with them and you hear their stories, then you are opening yourself. You are essentially making yourself a more advanced person. You are learning from them. And part of learning from them is treating them as full people. And that sounds sort of like I'm treating them as a utilitarian element. But if you think, we can't all be perfect Christians always. And so if you can't imagine them as the image of God as you should imagine it as a learning experience, both in humanity and your ability to be a leader and a teacher. Teaching children is the most challenging thing ever. Like, I give these lectures here and people say that they're very informative. This is way easier than teaching Sunday school. Teaching kids is really, really difficult because your theory of mind is weaker for kids, even though you were a kid yourself. You're separated from them. And so you're trying to teach them is very, very difficult because you're trying to figure out how they're responding to things. And the same thing is true for people who have lower IQ than you. Nathan Ensminger for USA $25. Thanks for the stream, Dave. Well, thank you very much. Another one from Chase for $10. Thanks for the stream. Thank you very much too. Okay, we got to get going here. It's very, very late. Owen Zelensky for $5 USA. Hello, Dave. I hope all is well. Thank you for the dinner and the show last week. I appreciate your conversations about magic, even though if you're a little bit tough on the Timmies. Well, how does one develop our love of a hobby without being a fan or in a fandom? Well, I think you are going to be part of a fandom if you like the thing. You know, I could say I'm a Warhammer fan because I like this idiotic books, but you have to be aware of what it does, right? You have to be very, very aware that these objects have a poisonous element in their meta is inviting you to abuse them in the same way that alcohol does, right? And you have to erect barriers around them so that you are using these objects to get the best thing out of the thing, and then you're not using them to get to kind of poison your brain and to lull you into these false modes of existence. And that's my only suggestion with all of this. That's the way you do it. And Timmies are great. I mean, like, I'm a Timmy Warhammer player. I don't even play Warhammer. I'm such a Timmy. Like, I only have it to talk about it and to read the books. That's the ultimate Timmy activity. And, you know, and every now and again, like, I put paint on something because I'm too exhausted to, after my work and taking care of the kid and writing, I'm too exhausted to write a more blog stuff or to think of doing anything more intellectually onerous than that. So yeah, I'm a total Timmy. It's understandable. Dreadnought for $3 USA. I don't know about Christian antinatalism being much of a heresy, Dave. IIRC. Augustine endorsed human extinction via universal celibacy. Admittedly, it's more anti-sex than antinatalist. Well, I mean, you know, I do not think that that's a proper interpretation of Augustine. I'd really have to say a citation for that, Dreadnought, but Augustine's a doctor of the church, and arguing for the extermination of the human race, that would be a pretty big mistake for a doctor of the church to make. I do know Paul says something along the lines of it's better to be celibate and he, I mean, in one of his passages, he does treat marriage as if it's kind of like a consolation prize for not being celibate, a priest or a monk. And, you know, the Baltimore Catechism makes like a similar argument that it's like better to be a priest than it is married. I think that's questionable theologically. I think there's sort of an equivalence there. It certainly is a more powerful position to be a priest because you're wielding greater spiritual power. But saying that they're across the board better seems to be kind of, I can't imagine that being part of a non-poisoned theology. I really need to look into that, Dreadnought. Is there another question there? But anyway, I can't imagine this argument. I can't steel man it. If I can't steel man something, I don't understand it. Solo Acolyte for USA $10. Thanks for the stream as always, Dave. Practical question for you. You are a software engineer. I'm a software engineer and I was laid off recently. I have 3 years of experience that feels like nothing in this market. Any advice for navigating and finding work other than lead code and applications sent into the HR void? Well, look, I mean, you want to know my suggestion? First of all, I mean, you need to get a job, right? So, I mean, you need to support yourself some way. So I imagine you'll be getting a job either in programming or not. So the way that you're phrasing this, it sounds like you have some experience. You're looking to get back into the industry, I should say. The way to get back into the industry is to work on projects. Have a GitHub page with projects that you've contributed to and be able to describe your contributions to the project in operative engineering terms. Like, I coded this, I refactored that, I did the unit testing for this other thing. I did benchmark testing for X. I was able to put X in, this will put you ahead of other people. Like, learn Docker and then take an application that is not Dockerized that you like using in open source and Dockerize it. And then integrate that into a Kubernetes instance. Like, if you can say that you've done that and you can put it out there, even if someone else comes along and does it better than you, you can put that as a project on your GitHub page, and it shows that you've actually done it. And that's hot technology right there, and it's really easy to learn. Like Terraform and Docker and Kubernetes are really easy stuff to learn. Okay, they're really hard to learn by just watching a YouTube channel, but if you do them, then that's a huge skill, and you have to do it. You have to do it, and you have to have it on GitHub, and you have to, or GitLab if you don't like the people who run GitHub because they're all woke idiots. You have to have evidence that you've actually put something into existence. Always be building is my suggestion with computer programming. The way to do it, the way to learn it is to do it. Although I wouldn't, programming is a little bit impacted right now. You could also look for other jobs and just have programming as an experience. It's also something to consider. Programming is a great experience for learning how to think and think about things. Gray Smog for $3 USA. What kind of healthcare system do you think would be best? Laissez-faire, Vietnamese, or Canadian death penalty? Well, anything's better than the Canadian death care. I don't know. I mean, if you were to ask me to design a healthcare system for the ground up, it would be a government managed system for catastrophic stuff, and then a private incremental stuff for upkeep care. That would be my ideal system. To like all the catastrophic life, like a two-tiered thing. Like put the catastrophic as 100% public, and then have the sort of upkeep stuff as private. But I'd also pair it with an enormous program of pronatalism and healthcare, of health upkeep, because that's what's killing us right now is what we're doing to ourselves and our lifestyles. But thank you very much, Grace Smog. Grace Smog for $4. Speaking of pathetic, Christian is claiming to be Jesus reincarnated. Could he really be the Messiah? And are future literal prophets possible? How do we tell them if they're really messengers of God? Okay. I don't think future prophets, I think future prophets are possible, and that there are people who are bearing prophecies. Like Hildegard von Bingen is someone that I would consider a prophet. You know, the Fatima children are prophets in a sense, right? They're bearers of some kind of post-Christ divine revelation. I don't believe that there is anybody who can be a prophet, like in the Old Testament, where they're like, God is currently literally speaking to me, and like I am about to leave a political movement. I don't think that anybody can know whether they're a saint or not. Just like you can't know whether you're in a state of grace. And so, I think that, we have to treat this with, if anyone does what Christian does, I think you need to treat this with this large amount of, obviously you need to treat this with a large amount of skepticism. But with all religious leaders, Jesus already laid out the criteria. You know them by their fruits. If they act mature and reasonable and actually demonstrate leadership, then, there might be someone worth listening to. If they're just acting like lunatics like Christian, if they're acting like they're trying to LARP out dimensions of being a saint, then you just have to treat that as kind of the sad cases of mental instability that it is, and it is very sad when it happens. Leo John Ginad for $3 USA. What would you change if you could write Lorgar? So Lorgar is a character from Warhammer 40k. So I think Dan Abnett gets Lorgar all wrong. I think Lorgar should be more like Kurtz, like a genuine believer. But the thing is that he needs to be a villain in Warhammer 40k. So, he does things where, no true believer would do this. Like betraying people, like true believers do not like treachery because treachery belies lack of belief. And lack of belief really pisses them off. And so they have their own internal rule system. So I would want Lorgar to behave more like Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, or from from Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. That's really more my vision of Lorgar, like insane false prophet who truly believes it. And that's what makes it horrifying, rather than like just nutso guy who wants to be evil because he's in a pulp novel and he's cackling for the camera. Last super chat before the psalm. That Augustine passage was about it said Dreadnought for $3 says that Augustine passage about human extinction via celibacy was something I read a while ago. I'll see if I can find it again. I don't consider it doctrine. I'm pretty sure it's authentic. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously against Catholic doctrine. So what you're saying is that Augustine made a really, really big mistake. Possible, but man, I consider that to be a pretty big mistake, considering it's pretty obvious that St. Paul didn't believe something that extreme. Okay, so that's it for the super chats, guys. Thank you all for tuning in on this very rambly live stream. I'll read the psalm for the night. It is Psalm 4 for a psalm of David. Answer me when I call you God, my righteous God. Give me my relief from my distress. Have mercy on me. Hear my prayer. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Know the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call him. Tremble and do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Offer the sacrifices to the righteous, but trust the Lord. Many, Lord, are asking, who will bring us prosperity? Let the light on your face shine on us. Fill my heart with joy. When their grain and new wine abound, in peace I will lie and sleep. For you alone, Lord, will make me dwell in safety. Thank you guys for joining me for this version, for this episode of Fiddler's Green. I'm very tired. I'll see you next week, and hopefully I'll have another essay out sometime soon.